right, good morning, everybody. Good morning. Thank you all so much for coming to our Exploring Florida Aquaculture Workshop number 2. How many of you have been here before? Wonderful. Well, thank you for coming. Welcome or welcome back. FAU Harbor Branch was founded in 1971, and we are now the northernmost campus of Florida Atlantic University. We have been doing over 50 years of ocean science for a better world. My name is Laura. I am the Outreach Project Coordinator, and my job is to share science with the community. And I previously worked in aquaculture, so I'm especially excited to share all about aquaculture with you guys today. Last year, Dr. Gabby Barbarite, the Outreach Coordinator, the Outreach Director, she partnered with the faculty here at FAU Harbor Branch on a grant to host public workshops. And the goal of these grants were to educate the community, the seafood industry, to talk about the important role of aquaculture, and also to answer some of the most frequently asked questions that we get. We're standing here today because we were awarded that grant from the Aquaculture Specialty License Plate Program that's hosted through the Harbor Branch Oceanographic Institute Foundation. So thank you to them. If you haven't already, please purchase a plate. Proceeds from that come back to research at Harbor Branch. So this is the second of a 4-part series, like I mentioned, and it's hosted the second Saturday of each month. Each session focuses on a different topic. Last month's was an introduction to aquaculture and sustainable seafood. It was wonderful. The presentations covered aquaculture around the world, Florida aquaculture specifically, how to choose sustainable seafood, and why seafood is important for our health. If you missed it, it's not a problem. We recorded them, and they're available on our website for you to watch later. Today, we have an excellent lineup. We're going to be hearing from scientists, our industry partners, some farmers, and more. And today's workshop is all about Finfish aquaculture. So before we get started, just a few housekeeping points. I'll be the MC. I'll be trying to keep us on track for time. The schedule is out on the front table. If you guys didn't grab one, feel free to grab one quickly. If you think of a question, write it down or just kind of hold it in your mind. Instead of doing questions after each presentation, we're going to have a panel Q&A discussion at the very end of the workshop this morning. It's going to be a really great discussion. So lastly, please silence your cell phones. And with that, we will get started with our first presentation by Dr. Jim Masterson. He's a faculty member here at FAU Harbor Branch. His presentation is all about finfish aquaculture globally. So with that, let's please welcome Jim to the stage.
Thanks very much for joining us this morning. It's greatly appreciated. Let me see if I have the right remote before we get going. Don't we have new remotes? It's not working. Okay, I'll get started without one. Today we are, I can't even do it here. There we go. Talking about finfish today, so scales and tails and bones, and it's going to be next month that we'll be talking about our cultured invertebrates. So we're confining our conversation today to finfish. Finfish is big business. If you were here a month ago, you recall that we said right around 2010, 2011, aquaculture actually outpaced capture fisheries. We are farming more fish than we are harvesting globally to feed hungry mouths. Around the same time, fish production actually outpaced beef production on the planet. There are good reasons for that. If we look at the land use per kilogram of product produced, beef is way up at the top as far as those land requirements, and fish farming farming is way down. So it's conservative from that standpoint. As far as the percent of greenhouse gas emissions from aquaculture, it's a fraction of what traditional agriculture is, despite the fact that it's such a fast-growing sector. And both of those segments are just a fraction of the total anthropogenic greenhouse outputs. So if we look at global aquaculture production, and we can just look at the 2020 numbers there, it's split out by product, and the blue on the bottom, that's freshwater finfish, and that is the largest single production category around the world. A far smaller section of that is marine finfish. It's a small but growing category, and Paul and Joe are going to share that information with you later today. We need to see that sector continue to grow if we're going to make good on our promise to alleviate pressure on capture fisheries, because we're still hunter-gatherers when it comes to going out and getting that marine product. This kind of shows the same thing where aquaculture is outpacing capture across the board except for that saltwater component, where the vast majority of what we are consuming is still coming from wild harvest. So this is a busy table. This is from a recent publication from UN FAO. It's the top 10 aquaculture categories globally, and there's a table and graphical depiction of the same numbers here, but I'm going to point out a couple of things. Finfish are 5 of the top 10 slots for global production, and that group on the top, the carps, barbels, other cyprinids, that's about 25% of total global aquaculture. It is a huge, huge international sector. I don't know that I've ever actually eaten a carp in my life because it's happening on the other side of the world. And then the 5 finfish groups together is over half of total global aquaculture. So we see tilapias there, catfishes, salmonids. That last category, freshwater fishes, NEI, is not elsewhere included. So it's a catch-all with some of the larger finfish categories. And the vast majority of this production is on the freshwater side. If we break that out further, and I put fish in quotes because there's a couple of non-fish here, we see that 6 of our top 10 species around the world are carps. The grass, silver, common, and bighead carps are part of the Asian, the Chinese carp complex, and then the katla and the rohu are part of the Indian carp complex. So that's 6 of the top 10 there. We've got 2 additional fish, tilapia and Atlantic salmon, that we're going to talk about, and then the inverts that we will visit in April include manila clams and white shrimp. Hard to make out the details on these figures. I've pulled this out from something I showed you a month ago, but just looking at finfish and first looking at inland aquaculture production, all the freshwater, we see China and India and Indonesia being 1, 2, and 3, then the rest of the world, Vietnam and Bangladesh and Egypt, and we actually are on the map here at number 16 for finfish production. The United States comes in 16th, and that's because of our freshwater finfish aquaculture. If we look at marine and coastal, these is the saltwater side of things. We're not on the map. We still see China, but we see Norway and Chile getting the next 2 spots because of the global Atlantic salmon industry. We talked about the systems used for aquaculture last month, and all of these systems come into play with the finfish being used. Traditionally, ponds are used for those freshwater fishes, but they certainly can be grown in other systems, sometimes more efficiently, but possibly not cost effectively, depending on what you are getting for your product. So getting into some of these specific categories. Carp aquaculture, I used to say 2500 BC is when we can trace it back to. That's been pushed back about 1,000 years from recent discoveries. So carp aquaculture has been a long part of human history. And historically, these were low-density ponds, low stocking rates, minimal supplemental feeding, often table scraps to fertilize the ponds. And that natural pond productivity activity is what the carps are eating. As far back as 500 BC, people had worked out the techniques to spawn carp in captivity. Prior to that, fingerlings were collected from rivers and streams and put in ponds to continue growing them. Showed this last month, and just to put it back in your mind, pond culture started out a very extensive, low input, low output, low tech process, but it has been pushed towards the intensive side. So all of these categories I'm going to talk about, we've seen the world push towards intensive culture. You don't become a top 5 aquaculture commodity by throwing table scraps into your ponds. It's big inputs and big returns. So sometime between the 6th and 11th century AD, monoculture of common carp in China gave way to polyculture, several species of carps being grown in the same systems, grass, silver, black, bighead carp, all being grown. There's this wonderful, probably apocryphal story in aquaculture that it had something to do with a Tang Dynasty emperor named Li. That's the Chinese name for common carp. And it would not be right for commoners to be eating the emperor's namesake, and so by decree, you couldn't grow common carp. Probably a fishtail, but it's a fun one. The reality is that the little fingerling fish are hard to tell apart, so mixed stocks went into those ponds, and there was a benefit to it. We had an example of niche packing and being able to take advantage of different trophic utilization levels, where one species is consuming benthic invertebrates, others are in the water column consuming plankton, while others are eating forage fish at the top of that food chain. And so it's a very efficient way to fully utilize the trophic levels in that system. Several centuries later, India did the same thing, adopted their own polyculture systems with a different set of carps. And this began as a low input practice, but our modern industry is highly intensive. High stocking, high feeding, lots of reliance on prepared feeds that are nutritionally complete, and a very high level of system management. We also see raceways and cages being used for carp. There's some some recirculating production of carp, but high-intensity ponds are still a huge part of that landscape. 95% of production is coming from just these 4 countries, with 80% coming right from Asia. And 2021, we had 31 million metric tons of production. Tilapia, they're African natives, but they've been introduced all around the world for aquaculture. They have geographically the largest production range of any finfish. There's 85 countries at least that are now producing tilapia. And like carps, it began as an extensive practice, but has intensified over time. And you can see how aquaculture versus wild capture, starting in the 80s and 90s, just took off exponentially, and is the story for tilapia. Mild flavor, ease of culture, very adaptable animals. One of the reasons this is now such an ubiquitous species. So the largest tilapia producing country, not in Africa where they're native to, but in China. And they've actually experienced a tapering off. 1.6 million tons of stable production has tapered to about 1.2 million tons. That's reflective of an emerging middle class in China, and they're not necessarily going for the cheapest products across the board. So there's a lot of export production. More than half of the production is export production now. Indonesia is actually poised probably this year to outpace China as far as production of tilapia. Egypt, Brazil, Thailand, they round out the top 5 producing countries for tilapia. 2021, 6.3 million metric tons. That's a lot, but it's not the 31 million metric tons that we saw for the carps. This is the United States story. We've seen consumption rise dramatically, and that is export to the U.S. It's imported product that we are consuming, domestic production, and this ends in 2014, but it's not gone up too much since then. It's a small niche part of what we're actually consuming. and the vast majority of demand here is met through imported products. Catfish, this is an incredibly diverse order of fishes, 39 families and over 3,000 species. You find them on every continent other than Antarctica. And most of them are freshwater. There's some marine and brackish representation. And more than half of the order is found in the Americas. These guys actually are in a dead heat with tilapia as far as global production. And in fact, about a year ago, they eclipsed tilapia, but they're kind of leapfrogging each other. But basically, just about the same amount of production. And that 6.1 is wrong. That should be, I think, 3.3? I better go back. Well, I'll correct myself if I realize I got it wrong. So Asia is the story again. Keeping Asia off the graph for now, you see the Americas and Europe. Europe's just kind of flatlined there. Africa, the Americas with low levels of production, and then to add Asia, you see that's where most of our catfish production is occurring. Nearly 6 million metric tons just coming from Asia. Our North American channel catfish is one of the first produced. There's several blue cats and several congeners that are produced, but that's only a fraction of the global total. And in fact, there's more channel catfish produced elsewhere in the world. Since 2010, there's been more channel catfish production in China than in the U.S. And it's a temperate species that can be grown in cooler parts of Asia, whereas some of these other carps are more tropical. There's been a lot of introduction of that species around the world. And still just one part of catfish production. We've seen Pangasius, the Pangas fishes, really take off and add to their numbers over the last couple of decades, and native to Vietnam, other Southeast Asian countries, but they have expanded rapidly into a lot of other countries, using manufactured feeds, having access to export processing facilities have pushed that. So basa and swai, those sorts of things are these Pangasid catfishes. And they're well suited for tropical aquaculture, and 1.6 million metric tons in 2019. They're facultative air breathers. They gulp air, which means that high temperatures in ponds don't really stress them out too much the way they would temperate catfishes. Lots of other countries are now culturing the Pangasids as well. Africa, the Clarius catfish come from Africa, but there's a lot of non-African producers. These guys are also facultative air breathers. They have an accessory organ that allows them to air breathe. Walking catfish that are non-native exotics here that sometimes you'll see on rainy days flopping across the streets, that's a Clarius catfish. Ponds are traditionally the culture system used, but they get really good yields using RAS systems. And whether that can be cost effective on a large scale is something that we'll probably find out very soon. There are South American catfishes that are part of the global story as well. These are tropical warm water species, exhibit fast growth. They've worked out spawning techniques for a couple of these as well. That guy there, pseudoplatystoma, means almost a flat mouth, and they're commercialized, and there's research pushing that species. Peru, Brazil are key producers there, and then the silver catfish is being developed in Argentina, Uruguay, and also in Brazil. Interestingly, it seems to do okay on a diet that has more plant protein in it. So from a conservation standpoint, there should be interest there. Salmon, we can go back to the 1960s and see experimental culture of Atlantic salmon, but it was in the 1980s that Norway emerged as a commercial producer. A decade later, Chile became a big producer, and these are not native to Chile. That is a non-native example of culture. Drastic growth of the industry over the last several decades. Now 70% of what we consume is farmed rather than being wild harvested. Over 2.2 million tons of farm salmon produced in 2015 and less than 1 million tons of wild salmon caught that same year. It's a long production cycle, 3 years or so, with the first year being indoor in cold freshwater recirculating systems, and then the animals are traditionally moved to cage transport. And it's a small number of countries that dominate this traditional industry: Chile, Norway, Canada, Scotland. Cold water, sheltered coastal environments, glacial fjords that have deep protected waters. That's a good place to rear salmon in cages. But we also see Australia, Faroe Islands, Iceland, Ireland, New Zealand, and the United States contributing. There have been problems with cage-based salmon aquaculture. They do have some potential to disrupt natural environments. That can be through discharge of waste products, chemical or nutrient wastes, or through escapes of animals or their pathogens and parasites. Siting and managing these systems properly can greatly reduce these risks. There's also a concern about the traditional salmon feeds, high in fisheries products, fish oil and fish meal, but the industry is aware of the need to wean ourselves off of this. And in the last couple of decades, they've been able to take the ratio of fish to non-fish proteins to about a 1-to-1 ratio, and this continues to improve, not just for salmon, but for other cultured fish as well. Moving into the United States, we see food fish is at the top of our industry here. So over 1,300 farms producing about $730 million of product, most of that being freshwater product. We've seen from 1998 to 2018 not a huge jump in the amount of food fish being produced, but not a taper off either. But we see mollusks increasing quite a bit in that span. Still, 47% of all U.S. aquaculture sales in 2018. Top species: catfish, trout, tilapia, hybrid striped bass, and salmon. So catfish is a big aquaculture success story for the United States. It's the king of U.S. aquaculture, and that's in terms of production pounds and total value, and it's a little more than half of all U.S. farmed food fish. Majority of this is occurring in the South. Mississippi, Alabama, Arkansas, those are the top producing states. Considered a delicacy by many, including myself. Mild flavor, high protein, low calories. And almost all of this commercial production is carried out using small earthen ponds, using well water as an abundant water source. And they're very conservative of the water as well. So channel catfish is at the core of the industry. There's a lot of work with a blue catfish, channel catfish hybrid now that is starting to take up a lot of the pond space as well. They're euthermal. They have a wide range of temperature tolerance, as low as just above freezing to as much as 100 degrees Fahrenheit or so, but an optimal growth range in that 75 to 85 degree Fahrenheit range. In the wild, they're omnivorous, but they are fed a nutritionally complete pelleted diet. Soybean meal, seeds and grain products, just a little bit of animal protein still in there, usually provided as a floating pellet that they have plenty of time to consume. So small earthen ponds are the rule here. Fingerlings get stocked in the spring. They will remove market-sized animal through seining. So it's a mixed age pond that they remove the market-sized animals from. Aerators are used to increase oxygen, especially in the warmer months, and ponds are left in production for years without completely draining them. You take them down a little bit to harvest the animals, make it easier to pull a net, but you don't drain the ponds until you have to effect repairs and patch the levee walls. So it's a very conservative industry from a water use standpoint. Our production has declined recently. That's in part due to the competition from those imports. And so, if you want to support the U.S. industry, make sure you're buying U.S. catfish. Imported tilapia products can compete as well. So we saw about a 2.5% drop between 2019 and 2020. By July 2021, we saw a 3% drop in acreage of ponds from the prior year as well. Feed prices have gone up, and that cuts into your revenues as well. Quick fun facts before we leave catfish, they're cavity spawners. So they need a chamber that the females will deposit that spongy egg mass into. And there's just a few months in the spring into the summer where they're laying those egg masses. You can use old aluminum milk cans, buckets, barrels, all sorts of different things, as long as they're 10 gallons or so and wide openings so the large fish can get into those cavities. From there, you collect those egg masses and you bring them into the hatcheries, and you use hatching troughs or jars to bring those animals through to hatching. Trout. Native rainbow trout makes up the bulk of the industry. They're the most popular, and they're the easiest reared of the species, but there is some production of our native brook trout as well as the brown trout, introduced well over a century ago from Europe. Most of that is state hatchery aquaculture or private company aquaculture, either for stock enhancement or pond stocking purposes. A little of it gets into the food market. Rainbow trout, they grow fast, they tolerate crowding, they do really well on an artificial diet, and they do really well in cold, oxygenated water. So these flow-through, gravity-fed raceways that we can sight on hillsides using mountain spring and stream water, this is a good choice for a culture system for these guys. So in 2018, you had over 330 farms, almost 40 states that were producing trout, and this was about 16% of all farm fish sales in the United States. Total value, almost $96 million for the food fish. There's some money in selling eggs, stockers, fingerlings, and fry as well. Top producing states, Idaho is at the top, and North Carolina was number 2 for a long time, but Washington State the last couple of decades has outpaced North Carolina by a lot. California, Pennsylvania also producing. So tilapia, there are U.S. producers, but again, most of what we're consuming here is import product. They're a warm water species. And we can use southern warm temperature outdoor ponds, or you can use tanks and RAS systems, and usually the American product is sold to niche markets, live food, fish, and specialty markets, because you can demand a higher price for that product. In some parts of the United States, the cultivation of tilapia is strictly regulated, so we don't have unwanted introductions. Cat's out of the bag in Florida. We do have a lot of invasive tilapia here, but outside of Florida, we haven't seen big problems in the United States yet. 10 to 12 months, you can typically get harvest size tilapia, and you can produce year-round product in indoor systems. You can stagger your production so that you have fresh or live product on a weekly or a monthly basis, so you can meet the needs of those niche markets. In 2018, you had almost 140 farms in 27 states and about $40 million in sales. Most of that, almost all of that is food fish. Top producing states, there we are at the top there. And then Ohio, Hawaii, Texas round out the list. California only had 9 farms that were reported, but as far as sales, their total bottom line was better even than Florida's. This is a story where with small numbers of farms, there's some secrecy as far as the numbers, so there's some estimates that have gone into this number. Neat fact about our tilapias, all of the major farm species, the females are mouth brooders. They brood the eggs, they brood the newly hatched fry, and some farms will actually let the females continue to incubate those eggs and fry, or they can be removed and put into hatching jars, hatching trays. Hybrid striped bass, this is a cross between our U.S. Atlantic striped bass and a very closely related species of white bass. And you can have the striped bass be the female or male. If it's a male striper and a female white bass, that has been termed the sunshine bass, and that is the more popular of the crosses. So in high school science, you probably learned about hybrid vigor, that hybrids often have favorable traits that neither of the parents have, and that's the case here. You have the good growth traits of the striped basses, but the hardiness of the white bass. These tend to not be useful for the next generation, so you have to continue to produce those hybrids going back to the parental lines. Originally, these were produced in the 1960s, not for food, but to stock into reservoirs for recreational fishing purposes. Again, the hybrids typically don't breed, so you have to continue to produce the fingerlings, and that's a little niche industry there. 1980s is when we saw commercial culture, and now there's several states that are growing these guys, both as a food species and for recreational fishing. And like U.S. produced tilapia, these typically go to market as a live product or as a fresh harvested in the round product, because you can fetch more money that way. Fingerlings, they're produced through artificial spawning, hormone injection, strip the gametes, manual mixing to fertilize your gametes, and then you stock them into fertilized freshwater ponds. They start out eating that natural zooplankton prey. They get weaned onto pellets, starting within a couple of weeks to a couple of months, and within 45 to 50 days, they're 1 to 2 inch size. They move on the next size pond, and then again several months after that. And by the end of that second growing season, you've got a harvest-sized animal. They do really well in recirculating systems, and this seems to be a case where the economics eventually may favor recirc as far as getting more bang for your buck over ponds. They tolerate a wide range of temperatures. They're euryhaline. They can be grown in full-strength seawater, brackish water, or freshwater. So there's an industry in Illinois, for example, doing these completely in fresh water. So in 2018, you had over 60 farms, almost 20 states, and most of that was food production, but some are producing stocking-sized animals or fingerlings or fry for stocking or for other grow-out producers. Farm gate of these guys was almost $35 million, and most of that was food-sized fish. North Carolina, Illinois, Florida, Arkansas, California, Pennsylvania, Virginia are all up at the top of the list there, with an additional 15 farms producing hybrid bass for conservation, recreation, or restoration purposes. So salmon is an interesting story in the United States. Atlantic salmon, by far most cultured. There's some Pacific culture of coho and chinook on a much smaller scale. The natural distribution of these guys across the entire basin of the North Atlantic, but there's been introduction into the U.S. Pacific, California, and elsewhere along the West Coast produces Atlantic salmon, or used to. And Chile, again, is not part of their natural range. Only 7 companies producing in the United States in 2018. In 2022, a big Washington State industry, one big company was closed down for the reasons we just talked about. And there's one operation now that is producing a market-sized Pacific salmon for food consumption as well. There is a lot of production at federal and state facilities for restoration and recreational stocking, and that is a historic thing. You see a picture there from 1940 with a federal hatchery worker that's shaking and washing salmon eggs. So this has been a long-standing part of salmon aquaculture. And we almost lost our Atlantic salmon in a lot of their native range, but a lot of watersheds have seen reestablishment through these efforts. And there's significant regulatory hurdles to expanding our cage-based culture in the United States, whether they're inshore cages, whether they're offshore cages. But now that we're seeing wrasse salmon culture start to emerge, and you'll hear a talk on that today, maybe we're going to see production numbers growing over the next decade. So I'm going to leave with that thought that your next salmon might come from a massive land tank here in Florida. And you're going to hear about that very soon. I hope we see you guys in a month for inverts, and I'm going to give it back to Laura. Thanks very much.
Not yet. Thank you so much, Jim. That was a lot of information to cover, but he did it very well, and I feel like I'm ready to eat some fish. So our next presentation is going to be given by Dr. Paul Wills. He's a research professor here at FAU Harbor Branch. He's going to talk to us specifically about finfish aquaculture research here on our campus. So please give him a warm welcome.
Thank you, Laura. All right. No? No, it shows that it's on. Now I'll get it closer. Can you hear me now? Test, test. Test? Okay, wonderful. Did this start working? Is this working? No, not working. All right. Arrows we go. All right, so my name is Paul Wills. I am a research professor here at Harbor Branch, and I'm also Associate Director for Research. My experience in the realm of aquaculture is with finfish. I'm a finfish aquaculture scientist. Although historically in my career I have also worked with crawfish. When I got my education at the University of Southwestern Louisiana in South Louisiana and worked with crawfish there. Took crawfish with me to Illinois. So you mentioned Illinois with the striped bass industry there. I was a bit involved with the striped bass industry there, but for my thesis I also worked with crawfish. And but I shifted over to my real love, which was finfish, with my dissertation work and much of my postdoc work and that sort of thing. So here at Harbor Branch, my primary area of work is in system design and development for finfish aquaculture and land-based realm, which I'll talk about a bit in this talk, and looking at new species development and refinement of species that are already in development, but shifting from freshwater when I was in Illinois primarily to marine fish here in South Florida, which makes a bit sense. So helping to push that bar that he showed you more towards the culture side of production for marine fish. Now that doesn't mean that we're going to eliminate capture fisheries. Capture fisheries plus aquaculture is the recipe for success for marine seafood. So let me get just arrows are not working.
Click on your slide. You probably have to
There you go. So just to refresh your memory, the different types of finfish aquaculture that we see in the U.S. in particular, we have food fish aquaculture, which most of us here are probably thinking most about. This is a huge growth area of aquaculture for finfish in the world and in the United States. But a big part of the aquaculture picture in the United States has always been bait fish as well. Most of the bait fish that you probably use when you're fishing come in the Midwest or other parts of the countries. If you're freshwater fishing, most of those are probably coming from aquaculture. Very large industry for finfish production centered in Arkansas, with massive distribution networks going throughout the country. Ornamental fish are also a very important component of finfish aquaculture. We're seeing quite a lot of marine ornamentals nowadays, which I've depicted with the clownfish. Here on campus, we have a company that's not part of Harbor Branch. They lease land from the foundation that is part of our campus and has historically been part of our campus, called Oceans, Reefs, and Aquariums. They do sustainable production of marine ornamental fish. So if you have an ornamental aquarium, marine ornamental aquarium, try to buy fish that come from ORA, because those fish are grown sustainably in land-based systems. Traditionally in the U.S., one of the biggest sectors of finfish aquaculture development has been for sport fish and stock enhancement. So the trout industry that we have in the U.S. has its roots in sport fishing and stock enhancement, as does our catfish industry. Many of the techniques that are still used for food fish production had their roots in sport fish, federal and state hatcheries that were doing development for sport fish and stock enhancement. I have the logo of a farm here on these pictures here, sport fish and stock enhancement. I actually managed a farm in Illinois for many years, and that was what we did there. We had more than a dozen species of finfish that we produced for sport fish and stock enhancement. So in the Midwest especially, where everybody's American dream is to have a car, a house, a bass boat, and a stock pond, this was big business. And that was a key part of my career development after my postdoc. And I went from there to here. So quite interesting. So this is one of our actual ponds. We would stock it every winter with trout for kids to come fish in. So here at Harbor Branch, when we look at the aquaculture research that is done, we really take a holistic approach to aquaculture development and refinement. We look at broodstock management. How do we work with broodstock in order to induce them to spawn effectively when we want them to? From there, once you have eggs, you go into hatchery production. And then as the fish gets bigger, you go into a nursery, followed by grow out. And then ultimately to harvest. So the fish that are produced, some would go into harvest, and then some would go back to the broodstock if you're doing selective breeding especially. So this is kind of the cycle of aquaculture, regardless of what type of system you're in, whether you're in ponds, raceways, or research systems. Like I said, here at Harbor Branch, most of our focus is on research systems, and I'll talk about that in a bit. I do want to put into context, though, with the other two species that are number 1 and 2 in production in the United States. Pond culture of channel catfish, which is one of the activities that the farm that I managed did. We did pond culture of channel catfish primarily to produce fingerlings for stocking, and then also fingerlings for other producers to grow out to food fish. We didn't do much of the food fish production ourselves because we were focused on fingerlings. But today, pond culture of channel catfish, traditionally it was done in very large ponds, 10 to 20 acres. The industry has started to shift now towards smaller ponds that, like Jim told you, 5 to 10 acres. 5 acres is real for some of the larger catfish farms, America's Catch and such, which are located in Mississippi. They're actually putting interior levees into their big 20 plus acre ponds to bring them down to 5 acres. These are highly integrated farms. They have their own feed processing plants, their own processing plants for after harvest, bringing the catfish to a fillet for market. And a 5-acre pond is the unit that they can process in one day through their pond or through their processing plants. So that's a very workable number for them when they're doing their production planning. These farms are extremely large. America's Catch, which I mentioned, is over 5,000 acres of water. So very, very large operations, which is why they are integrated basically to get the efficiencies of that sort of operation. Traditionally, it has been the channel catfish, Ictalurus punctatus. As Jim mentioned, the industry is really shifting wholeheartedly towards the use of the hybrid catfish. I spoke with some folks at the World Aquaculture Society meeting, which just happened a couple weeks ago, and they're telling me that pretty much in the near future, the entire industry is going to be using the hybrid catfish rather than the pure species. The reasons for that are the blue catfish actually grows much larger than the channel catfish, so you get a boost in growth. Plus, there is an inherent immunity through hybrid vigor to some of the diseases that channel catfish are plagued by. So the industry is moving towards that. It is more technologically more difficult because now you have to get both the males and females in spawning readiness at the same time. And rather than what we call volitional spawning, you have to do manual spawning. And I'll talk about volitional spawning with channel catfish. So just a little quick primer on how to make channel catfish or how to grow channel catfish. And most all of these pictures come from my farm. They're pictures that I took from the farm that I managed. So milk cans are the traditional means. Now they're harder and harder to get. Channel catfish farms have traditionally been in competition with antique dealers. Antique dealers love to buy these things, paint them, and put a picture of an eagle or a flag or something. And darn near every house in the Midwest has one sitting on their stoop. Every time I'd go to work, I'd see them, and I'd be driving to work saying, boy, I'd like to get that one. But other things work well. Nail cans is another because they have that perfect cavity. So channel catfish, as Jim told you, are a cavity spawner. They want to have a large cavity opening with a narrow mouth so that the male can guard the eggs and the young after they've hatched. So the male goes into the can. The cans are placed into ponds in about 3 foot of water. It's this much water. So you put them in the water with the mouth towards the deep portion of the water, and you have a float on them. So you see that there's a float. This is Amanda. She was the daughter of the farm owner who I worked for, and it was actually her 4-H project to do a set of channel catfish that year. So it was quite nice having an assistant with me during that production cycle that year. But when the water reaches the proper temperature in June or so, you put the cans out into ponds that have males and females. There's not an overabundance of males and females. The males will then go into the cans, clean that can out, and basically try to attract females in there to spawn with him. The female will go into the can and lay the eggs. The eggs are adhesive. They're an adhesive mass. As a producer, you go into the can every other day or so, and you remove those masses you check each can, the cans that have the masses, you remove those masses of eggs. They're all adhered to each other, so you basically just take your hand, and you can easily remove them from the surface. Those eggs then are taken to the hatchery. Traditionally, the industry uses a paddle wheel type hatchery. This paddle wheel hatchery system, these paddle wheels are on a rotating bar that's slowly rotating. The eggs are put into baskets, hardware cloth baskets, and what's happening here is those paddles are imitating the fanning movement of the male catfish inside the cavity to bring good water to them. So that was thought to be critical. And then some state hatchery guys figured out that they could actually get rid of the adhesiveness easily using sodium sulfite and papain, which is derived from papaya. And then once the eggs were released, then you could easily put them into jars. So here you see Amanda loading eggs into a traditional hatching jar, which is used for many species, walleye, northern pike, muskie. Many species use this type of jar hatching system. It was developed by a salmon and trout hatchery, one of the gurus of hatchery development in the Fish and Wildlife Service named McDonald. So we call them McDonald jars. And then those are put onto racks. You can see different colors of eggs. That's different maturity. As they get closer and closer to hatching, they get more and more orange. Then they'll get a little bit darker as the larvae develop eyes. Then they'll hatch in the jar. With channel catfish, we keep them in the jar and move them into raceway. And then they'll be in the raceway for a few days till they swim up. When they swim up, they're taking feed. We'll start to give them crumbled feed. It's nice. Channel catfish will go directly onto a feed. This is something that contrasts with our marine fish. They will not go directly on feed. Right now, we have to actually have an entire piece of our production system where we're producing live feeds that we then have to feed to our marine fish. So this is a key area of development for us, is how do we get them to get onto a feed directly. But channel catfish larvae are very big compared to our marine larvae. Once they get large enough, they're on feed good. This gets them through a critical period for a specific disease called channel catfish virus. And then you can move them into a pond. Once you know you have good, healthy larvae, or at this point juveniles, you move them into the pond, and then you start feeding them. You feed them for quite a bit, and Jim already told you that the feeds are predominantly land-based, vegetable-based feeds. Very, very little animal proteins nowadays. In fact, many of the feeds that you can get have almost no animal proteins. And most of the animal proteins that you see being used in the feeds are byproducts of other industries, chicken production and that sort of thing, rather than being proteins that are coming from marine systems. Then there's harvest. So you see us harvesting a pond of channel catfish. These are actually catfish that were destined for fingerling harvest. So that's me right there. We're pulling in a seine full of, this looks like a 6 to 8 inch channel catfish ready for stocking in ponds. And then they would go to ponds for stocking from our context. If you're looking at food fish production, of course, this is the ultimate destination that we want to see. And a nice southern catfish dinner with hush puppies and coleslaw, etc. Yeah, I'm getting hungry. I didn't eat breakfast, so that would be a good breakfast, though, if you ask me. Anyway, trout, to contrast the methods, so a lot of it's similar. You get the young and you grow them up and you feed them. Mostly trout is done in raceways. This is the traditional method. This is the method that was developed by state and federal hatcheries. Big differences, huge eggs, and mostly trout are going to be spawned by strip spawning. So the fish, when they're ready to spawn, when they're mature, the eggs are ovulating, the males are running ripe. We call it running ripe when you can easily put pressure on their abdomen and they're going to be flowing with sperm. You take the eggs in what we call a dry method, no water or anything. You make sure you get no water on the eggs because that'll activate them. And you strip the eggs here. They're actually using an air-assisted stripping method. So the eggs are released into the body of the body cavity. You introduce slightly pressurized air, and it'll force the eggs out. They can do a lot of fish very quickly. They're fertilized with sperm that's collected from the males, either beforehand or directly. And then the contrast is, in general, they go to kind of a tray system for hatching. Larger farms will use a larger McDonald type jar. It's actually a big, they're actually big, huge in diameter, not the small ones that I showed you for catfish. But a critical piece here in the development is picking the eggs. You can see all these white eggs that are in that tray. So when Jim showed you the previous black and white picture, what that fellow was actually doing was preparing those eggs to be picked to get the dead eggs out. Once you get the dead eggs out, all that's left are the live eggs, and then they go through to hatch. So the key contrast is volitional spawning versus manual spawning. In marine fish, we primarily do a volitional system. It's not done in ponds. It's done in tanks. We manipulate the light and the temperature to mimic what's happening in the wild. We can actually have the fish in a winter mode in the middle of the summer, get their ovaries and testes conditioned so that they're ready to ovulate. Sometimes with some species, we give them a hormone to induce ovulation. With other species, we can simply do a temperature pulse. Once we do that temperature pulse, it affects ovulation. But the key thing is that they're in the tanks, males and females together, and they go ahead and spawn. They do their spawning behaviors in the tank, and they spawn in the tank, similar to what we see with the channel catfish in a pond. Except in the pond, we're letting Mother Nature manipulate the temperature and the light. So, key now is what do we do? How are we going to grow these things? In many of these species, the industry is moving towards recirculating aquaculture systems. There will be a talk soon from a salmon producer that is doing recirculating systems, and then also from Joe Cardenas, who is going to talk to you about recirculating culture of pompano in a few moments. Once I get off of here and stop gabbing, right? But some of the key aspects of why the industry is and should move towards recirculating aquaculture systems. The main point is we have complete control in these systems. They aren't out in nature. They can be easily located in a building. What that does is it allows us to have year-round growing systems, so you no longer are tied to the seasons. In broodstock systems, like I said, we can manipulate light and temperature to elicit spawning condition when we need it. This allows for good production cycles, key consistent production cycles, and a key part of farm management, which is cash flow. If you're producing fish all year long, you have year-long cash flow. This was one of the things that plagued the farm that I managed, is being in the Midwest and tied to the seasons. Every winter, we ended our season in October, and then we had from October till the next March or so, where our ponds were way too cold to go in and harvest fish and that sort of thing. So we had this long period of zero cash flow since we were a seasonal production farm. So we had to really we had to save our money during the good times, and because we had almost no cash flow. So with in a recirculating context, you can manage your farm in a more efficient way, where you've got continuous production, continuous harvest, and then continuous cash flow, which is the best for farm management. It reduces water consumption. So a highly developed, engineered recirculating system can get down to about 5% per day of water requirements or less, depending on, I'm going to talk about a system called integrated multi-trophic aquaculture in a little bit, where we're down to about 0.5% per day. You have reduced effluent charge or discharge, but you do have control over that discharge. So if there are requirements for treating, you have complete control over that and access to the discharge, unlike with open ocean net pen. You can have extremely intensive production. Jim mentioned with the Clarius, 1,000 pounds per cubic meter. If you picture a cubic yard of water, having 1,000 pounds of fish in that area, it's almost more fish than there is water in a system like that. Enhanced biosecurity, have complete control over everything coming in and going out of the system. You have complete control over the feed, complete control over anything coming in, and you can control the introduction of disease into the system, which reduces your need for antibiotics or any other types of therapeutics. And you have increased food safety. Once again, control over the product means now you have control over the quality of that product that's going to the consumer, ultimately giving you higher food safety. And containment of escapees is almost 100%. Basically, they have to go through a pipe. You have control over that pipe, and they aren't going anywhere if you've designed your systems properly. So you probably heard about the Aqua Bounty salmon, which is a GMO salmon that's being grown. The farm that is growing those salmon is located in Indiana, and the watershed for that farm actually goes to the Mississippi River and down to the Gulf of Mexico. So assuming a fish was even able to escape from that farm, ultimately it's going to find itself in the Gulf of Mexico, which is not a particularly good environment for a salmon. So essentially, if there was the 0.0001% chance that a fish escaped from that farm, it's going nowhere. So research systems allow this type of control over escapees. So how does a research system work? Well, you have usually a tank of some sort that holds the fish. This can be a tank or a raceway, or different configurations are possible depending on the species you work with. Generally, we like a round tank because you get good water flow in a round tank, and you can easily remove the solid wastes from the fish. Those solid wastes go to a filtration system. That filtration is high efficiency, removes the solid waste from the water flow, gets them out into an effluent that you have control over. From there, you go to a process called biofiltration. Here, it's a bacterial-mediated filtration process where the liquid waste, the fish are primarily excreting ammonia. That excreted ammonia is converted first into nitrite, which is toxic, much like the ammonia. But ultimately, within this filter, it's converted to nitrate. The nitrates are relatively non-toxic. And then the water can be returned back to the fish to be used again. And this can happen over and over and over. Ideally, it could happen into infinity. Of course, you do have other things you have to deal with. You have to continue to add oxygen to the system, remove CO2 that the fish are putting out when they respire, as well as the biofilter. But you do have makeup water that needs to go in there because there is some wastewater for management of the solids in the system, cleaning and that sort of thing. And then also evaporation is something you're never going to escape. So you do have to add water to the system. Like I said, the high efficiency systems are in the realm of 5% or lower per day. This is an experimental system we have. It's about 2,000 gallons for tanks in the tanks. We have a larger system that's 20,000 gallons as well for demonstration, but it essentially works the same. Like I said, you have the tanks, you have solids filtration, then this big biofilter, and then ultimately the water goes back to the fish tank. There's a UV filter that we use in order it's a UV germicidal filter that bombards the clarified water now with UV in order to control any pathogens that may be in the system, even though there's probably very likely to be no pathogens being introduced anyway. So I teased you with the word IMTA, or Integrated Multi-Trophic Aquaculture, a little bit ago. This is what we would call a next generation recirculating system. Here, rather than looking at wastes coming from the system like we did with the traditional system, our traditional research system, we rephrase waste to resources. What do we do with these resources? So the IMTA system, we're turning wastes into resources and using those resources in order to design or build or produce in other crops for the farm. Other crops means more cash flow during different parts of the year, and theoretically should lead to a better cash flow situation for a farm. Now, I'll talk about some pros and cons in a bit. This is derived, this system for us as a land-based system is derived from a system that's being applied around the world, and particularly been developed highly in Canada with net pens. So in the open ocean, you have a net pen of salmon. From there, you have the wastes coming off of the cage. So this is designed as a means of mitigating for the wastes coming off of open ocean catfish cage or salmon cages. Down below the cages, they'll put solids waste collectors, basically sea urchins and sea cucumbers to use the solid waste coming out of the cage. The smaller particulates are going to flow with the current towards mussels. Not only are they flowing with the current, but they're also neutrifying that water, allowing production of algae that the mussels will use. So the mussels are using algae and the small particulates to grow that secondary crop. From there, the water still has nitrogen from the fish cages and from the mussels. The mussels are actually also producing some solid waste, pseudofeces, that are dropping down for this culture portion. But ultimately, that nitrogen, that clarified water that's full of good nitrogen and some phosphorus is going to production of kelp. And then that kelp can be harvested as another product. And you see in the market more and more kelp, sugar kelps and that sort of thing being marketed due to the adoption of these systems. And then theoretically that water goes out nicely clarified with all the nutrients removed. Of course, this is a leaky system. It's out in the open ocean. Our land-based system is not a leaky system because all of our water is running through pipes. It's very complex. It's a complex system because we have to flow the specific amounts of water and the specific water quality to different components of the system. But you can see in its core, we have the same recirculating system that I just showed you. Your fish and filtration, solids filter and biofiltration represented here, and your water is going through that component of the system over and over and over again. But in our concept of land-based system, we add other components. For instance, we add a component with shrimp culture. We add a component with seaweed culture. We have our urchins. We don't use mussels. There aren't very many warm water mussels that people particularly like to eat, so we're looking at oysters and clams and things and conch. But we also are looking at urchins. One of the things we found out early with urchins is they don't particularly like to eat just the solids. They will eat it, but reluctantly. If we give them algae that we're growing in the system as well, they do quite well. So the algae that's produced can either be used as a product going to market, or it can also be used as feed going back into the system. So we feed that to urchins, we feed that to the shrimp, and it makes the shrimp much better. And so you see it's this component type application of the various parts of the system. Ultimately, though, there's no waste. A waste product from the system is going to one of the other components in the system. And like I said, this system, so if it was just the fish and filter, we're about 5% water use. By adding all these other components, our water use goes down to 0.5% per day. So it's all about nutrient transfer in an IMTA system. So you have feed going to the fish. That feed and the uneaten feed and feces is the waste resource that we're talking about. That's going to be converted primarily to nitrogen and phosphorus, which goes to our plants. That's algae and sea vegetables are the plants. So this land-based concept is complex. There are earlier designs that were not complex. They were simply a loop, very much like we saw with the open ocean, but those didn't work particularly well. So the design that we've done is to mitigate for the problems with having just a simple loop system. With a simple loop system, every one of your components has to be able to handle all of the water flow. And that can be a problem for many of the species that we want to integrate into the system. So this more complex system is the remedy to that issue with the simple loop system. So our water flow is only going to that portion or that portion of the water flow is only going to a component that the component needs. The water quality can be selected. So if we have a species that is sensitive to nitrogen, we can take water coming from the plants where the nitrogen has been reduced. It's modular and expandable. If we have a waste that we want to turn into a resource, we look at that waste and we say, what is this waste a resource for in the wild, and what is the system function in the ecosystem of that particular potential product, and then what are the potential product routes for that particular species. So, and then you just design a loop on the system to accommodate that new species. So that's what we mean by modular, expandable, and flexible. And in theory, the theory of the whole system is to improve efficiency over our traditional land-based research systems. Some of the products that we've done, of course, fish, which is the context here. We've done pompano, cobia, red drum. All of them do quite well in this system. There's a little bit of vagary with some of them. Cobia, or pompano, or red drum, produce a lot of, they break their waste products down into very small particles. So there's a lot, the way we have to handle the solids is more critical than, say, pompano and cobia, which are produced in a more consolidated waste product. As far as the solid waste, the poop, just to be specific. Shrimp, we've grown in the system. We use biofloc culture for the shrimp. One of the products of the system is biofloc. So the solids, all the solids go into a biofloc reactor. So we can easily use that biofloc for shrimp. We are also looking at using that biofloc as feeds in the system. So we can collect that, dry it, make it into a meal, and then incorporate it into the diets, thereby reusing the proteins and such that are still in those solids. Extractive cultures in the system include the sea urchins and sea cucumbers that I mentioned, and then also oysters, clams, and also sponges. So we have researchers that are looking at various different sponges from the context of production of bath sponges all the way to the context of production of sponges that produce novel compounds that can be used as drugs in the future. We also have all the plants, the various different algae, seaweeds. Algae, when I say algae, I mean seaweeds that we use, microalgae that can be produced for feeding clams and oysters, and then what we call our sea vegetables. So these are our macrophytes. That'd be samphire or sea asparagus, sea purslane, sea blight, which is also called seepweed or saltwort, and then we also have our saltwort, which is also called pickleweed. A lot of them, in fact, a lot of these are also called saltwort, so don't be too confused. But all of these are wonderful products. They grow quite well in the these are a group of plants. They're vascular plants that live on land. We call them halophytes. They're salt-loving plants, and they do quite well in the system at high salinities. So another component of research that we do here at Harbor Branch right now is a project funded by the USDA. The title of the project is Ensuring a Steady Supply of Warm Water Marine Finfish Seed Stock to Support Development of the Industry. This is excuse me. This is a collaborative project between USDA, ARS, Harbor Branch, other Harbor Branch Oceanographic Institute farmers work with us directly, and then we have other research institutes that work with us on the project. So it's a wide-ranging project. Currently, we're primarily looking at pompano and red drum, but with some of our other research partners, we look at the Cereola, Almaco jack, and the California yellowtail as well. So it's a project of national scope, and you can see many of the farm partners that we have. Aquaculture will be talking in a bit about their work. A local company also that's located just south of here called Live Advantage Bait, Pro Aquatics, and then Pine Island redfish and Turtle Creek Aquaculture, which is a farm in Texas that works with redfish, among others. So wide-ranging, very nice project. This project looks holistically at these different species. We're looking at breeding. In particular, one thing that is lacking in most of our marine species nowadays is selective breeding. So in all of our other production contexts, we use selective breeding. So since marine finfish is such a new industry, most of the species we work with are really wild, broodstock coming from the wild. We want to get away from that. We want no impact on the wild, but we also want to improve these fish using traditional breeding methods. Nowadays, we have methods using genetics that we can accelerate selective breeding. It's a technique called marker-assisted selection. In essence, we find individuals that have the growth traits that we want. Nowadays, we can look at the genetics, the DNA strand. We can identify those that have genetic markers for the trait that we want. And then we can go and survey all the broodstock that are available and say, this one has it, this one has it, that one has it, this female, that male, that female, and we can select those individuals then to go into a breeding program. Traditionally, what our ancestors did is they took and they did all these different matings and looked at all the offspring and how did the offspring produce. So that method with most of our bovine species and that sort of thing took about 16,000 years. I don't think that Joe wants to wait 16,000 years. So this marker-assisted selection should get us to that place in just a matter of a dozen or fewer generations. So much, much quicker than because of our knowledge of DNA and the DNA sequence. Nutrition is also a key part of that project. How do we reduce our use of fish meal? Fish meal is a limited product. It puts a burden on our ocean fisheries. So we want to reduce that as much as possible. Our project is actually recently published on a fish meal-free diet for pompano. Of course, that's at the very beginning stages. It's the first time we've done a totally fish meal-free diet. They did quite well on it. A lot of promise for substantially reducing or eliminating fish meal from the diets. And that's not just fish. The fish meal, when I talk about that, there's the protein component of that we get, the fish meal, but there's also fish oil that's a product of the fishery as well. So that diet that we actually published on is a fish meal and fish oil free diet. So it's deriving its oil from various marine algae. So we look at nutrition for the broodfish, the larval components, and the juvenile components. Juvenile nutrition translates very well from our experience to the grow-out components as well. Those diets are essentially the same. We also are very keyed on health of the fish, not only for selective breeding. When we're doing selective breeding for growth, we don't want to inadvertently breed fish that are don't have the immunity we want. So we have this portion of selective breeding related to that. But we also want to do early detection of disease. Early detection of disease in a system means you can manage it easier, thus reducing use of any antibiotics and that sort of thing. And then from a health and nutrition perspective, we want to ensure we have healthy microbiomes. So the bacteria in the guts and that sort of thing, and the bacteria in the systems themselves that help to maintain a good environment and stress-free environment for the fish. So a lot of different topics on that particular project. Another project that we're working on is actually directed towards the channel catfish industry and improving efficiency of channel catfish industry. This is called the Hybrid Aerial Underwater Robotic System. This is funded by a joint call with NSF and USDA, where we have developed a automated drone-based water quality monitoring system. So today, farms use a lot of labor and a lot of vehicles. So that farm I told you about, they were a partner farm in this project, America's Catch in Mississippi, they have a fleet of 25 to 30 trucks that check oxygens on their farm constantly, 24 hours a day. And of course, with that many trucks, you have that many folks, employees that are checking the oxygen. There's a lot of room for error. There's with that many people involved. One of the things that they've instituted with that is they've started putting trackers on their trucks because they notice trucks down at the local bar instead of on the ponds. So, I'm not saying there's anything wrong with people. People are good, but there are different people out there, right? So they had folks that were actually not that particular. I don't know if that was that farm, but some farms had folks that were making up the data, and going and sleeping or going to the bar instead of doing their job. So, of course, you don't want that, and putting trackers on trucks helps, but it is another expense. But one of the things that we have keyed on this project is we don't want to do labor replacement because it will require folks to operate the system. Those folks will have jobs that are higher paid, more highly technical, and they will be able to do their job better because of this component of the system right here. Since the system can actually collect more data for the farm, it can collect data not just from one point on a pond, it can collect data from multiple points on the pond, and it can collect vertical profiles, which is something you can't do with traditional water quality monitoring systems that are on trucks. A truck drives to the edge of the pond, it has a boom that goes out, that has the probe on it, it gets at one point on the pond, at the very edge, which is not necessarily the best place to get a reading anyway, but that's what's accessible. This drone can go out to the middle of the pond, it can drop this sonde on this is actually an older version, but it's on a winch, and you can get a vertical profile of that pond. All this data can then go into an AI machine learning system and do prediction. So our prediction system is able to accurately predict dissolved oxygen in a pond 8 hours ahead at close to 90% accuracy. So now, rather than being reactive like the current system is, the current system, the person goes, collects the oxygen, sees a low reading, and then reacts to it. This system can predict which ponds are going to have low oxygen, and they can proactively turn on aeration, proactively get emergency aeration in, save more fish, reducing losses on the farm potentially. That's the theory of the system. Having operated a fish farm, this idea actually came from the owner of the fish farm that I managed for many years. I was up there visiting him over Christmas one time, and he said he had just bought a drone for himself to take pictures of his farm for his website. And he said, "You guys need to develop this." And we took that, and we looked at various different funding agencies, and we said, this is a perfect one. And now we've developed that. We've gotten continuation funding now to actually integrate robotics into the feeding systems and into the emergency aeration systems, so that when the system knows that there's a pond that's going to have a problem the following evening, it'll suspend feeding, for instance, on that pond, or it'll feed less, what the model predicts it should feed to maintain good dissolved oxygen and still maintain some growth in that pond. And it can actually go and retrieve emergency aerators, turn on aerators that are fixed in the pond, and retrieve emergency aerators and put it in the pond. So that's the next step of development. We haven't done that yet. We're about to buy our first tractor that we're going to turn into a robot in the next few months, and that's where we're at with that. That ties to a web app that the farm workers have access to, and then also that the farm owners. So if the workers on the farm are having an issue, they can easily call up the boss and say, "Hey, we've got this issue." The boss can look it right up at home and determine what's going on and give guidance. So this is what we call a collaborative robotic system. So the robot's collecting data and making actions, and then it communicates with the the workers and the farm managers in order to take proactive action that's needed. How much time do I got left? Not much? Okay, I can end it there then. All right.
Okay, thank you, Paul. Sorry to cut you short. We already had two amazing presentations this morning. We are going to take a break. So just a reminder, we will be having a panel discussion with all of our presenters at the very end of the workshop. So if you have any questions, write them down, keep them in your mind, save them so that everybody can hear them, and so our presenters can have a little breather. We're going to come back at, I believe, 10:35. Is that what your schedule says? So feel free to run to the bathroom, to run outside and get a little bit of sunshine. Just be aware that we will be coming back at 10:35, so don't wander too far. One more thing to note, Paul did a great job of explaining the IMTA that we have on campus. We actually have a miniature version at our Ocean Discovery Visitor Center, and we do talk about the IMTA quite a bit during our campus or our tram tour. So if either things are interesting to you, if you want to see any of those experiences, please come find me during the break. Thank you.
Drinking from the fire hydrant to fit all that in 30 minutes. Yeah, exactly. What's gonna make the count? What is the linear distance, the Canadian IMTA system? How many meters apart is cage to the mussels to the kelp? Okay, so it's very. Right, it's not a straight line. Yeah, no, that makes sense. Good time to go to New Brunswick, right? Yeah, I got it. Yeah, beautiful. Well, I can. I have it, and if he wants to use it, I want to get my chunk back as well.
Yeah, it's sitting on the desk.
I know. Yeah. Yeah, Wyatt said we're all set with the clicker.
So I don't know.
Yeah, Wyatt thought it was working.
It's on the other PC, so it's.
The batteries are working on this. So we need something up here. Well, let me get mine.
Yeah, I don't know. I don't want to mess with it.
All right, everybody, that break went by fast. If everybody could reconvene in our auditorium, we're going to try and stay on time this morning. So to ease ourselves back into the rest of the workshop, we are going to start with a film. So this film is by Soraya Films. And in this film, Sarah, the director, visits a fish farm in Central Florida that utilizes both ponds and tanks. This family-run farm grows sturgeon, which is very cool, hybrid striped bass, which we've already talked about today, and tilapia. The name of the farm is Anastasia Gold Caviar. So please enjoy.
The ocean is an incredible place. Let's keep it that way. Join us as we hunt for sustainable seafood. Our seafood choices matter for the future of ocean health. Hey, it's Sarah Curry from Soraya Films. In this episode, I'm visiting a fish farm in Central Florida that utilizes both ponds and tanks. This family-run farm grows sturgeon, hybrid striped bass, and tilapia. Let's check it out. In the small, quiet town of Pearson, a family is growing things you might associate with Florida, such as cattle. Down a winding road and through the oak trees, this family has also been quietly harvesting caviar, which comes from sturgeon. Sturgeon are living dinosaurs. They have inhabited the planet for hundreds of millions of years. Today we're meeting a mother, a daughter, and granddaughter. 3 generations of women who have built and worked on this farm for over 30 years.
I'm Jane Evans Davis, and we're here at our family farm in Pearson. Here on the farm, I do lots of things. It's a working farm for cattle. We have a large fish farm operation. We have sturgeon, hybrid striped bass, and tilapia. That's a full-time job right there, and that's my primary responsibility. My degree is in aquaculture, so I guide the family on how we do all of the fish business, the sturgeon, the caviar, and then I also help out with all of our cattle operations. About 1,700 acres here. When Mom and Dad put the vision together for the farm, it always had multi-components to it. We had the fish farm, we had the cattle operation, we have timber, and we have all the fields where we grow the grains. Since this is family owned, slowly we, found money to put into the farm to build it. So it took almost, 20 years, 25 years to build this farm and to make it sustainable. Our goal is to have a family operation for multi-generations. We want to keep this family farm.
I think the water level is looking pretty good. What do you think?
So what are we doing right now?
Lauren's gonna hop in the tank and we're gonna do what we call a belly check. She will look at the conformation of the fish, put it in our net, and we'll pull it over to the side and do a quick sonogram to validate that it has eggs. Straighten her up, there you go. Let her get calm. The ultrasound saves us from having to do extra biopsies. I can identify the size of the egg and how the eggs are spaced together. For me, it's very accurate.
Jane is deciding if the fish is a caviar fish, which means it will be harvested for its eggs, or if it's a spawner. If the eggs look good enough to be caviar, the fish will be moved inside, where they will be monitored more closely. The water is also cooler in the tanks inside, which is necessary to help get the eggs ready. If Jane decides the fish is a spawner, it will stay in the outside tanks and be used to repopulate the farm. All of the fish on the farm originally came from other farms in Europe. They've never taken any fish from the wild. and there's enough genetic diversity within the fish to spawn multiple generations for years to come.
Growing up, what we would do is we would use those ponds to catch our first fish. It was almost like every cast that you had caught a fish. And as a kid, it's like the most exciting thing. So I actually grew up in Orlando. That's where my mom had her job at the Living Seas at Disney. So we would come here on the weekends to work on the farm. And that's kind of where I got introduced to the hardworking aspect of fish farming. I really got my hands dirty at a young age helping out, and then kind of grew up loving that hard work. Once I got into the field and learned how important aquaculture would be, it just made me all the more excited to kind of be a part of this. What we do when I come to visit is just focus on some projects that really require a lot of hands-on work. And with the caviar production, that's between 3 to 5 people that are kind of required for that process, especially lifting the fish. And since my mom and my grandma are getting older, I don't let them do any of that anymore, but they still will try and pull it away from me because they want to do it.
Here in the United States, there's very few sturgeon farms, mostly because it is very large capital investment to get started. You have to have chilled processing rooms to be able to process the caviar. You need to be able to put the fish in a little bit cooler water so that the female's eggs will get ready to make caviar. It takes 8 to 10 years on the average for a fish to become mature. That's a long time to feed that animal. Very similar to the cattle industry, but we only get one harvest off of it. It is a riskier agricultural operation than some of the other operations.
Not so bad, guys. Try out the switch. And ready? Head first. Just caught on this other piece. The farm is raising 3 species of sturgeon: Osestra, Siberian, and Sevruga. The first fish they took out was a Siberian sturgeon. And while they have an idea of which fish might be ready, they don't actually know until they take a biopsy which eggs are perfect.
Nice belly. Hopefully that's caviar. So we cut through just the epidermis, and we make a small incision into where the eggs are sitting there. This little cannula pulls them out. We should be getting more eggs. Oh, I don't know, guys. But I have a gut feeling that she's not going to have a full set of caviar. What do you think?
Let's go sample another one then. Do you want a marker? I want you to be in love with this fish.
Yeah, let's put her back.
The second fish they sampled was a Sevruga sturgeon, a fish smaller than the first Siberian, and they hope this is the one.
She's really good looking Sevruga. Right color and the right size, and then the last part of the exam is they got to roll, not break. Yep. Okay, here comes the connoisseur part. Pops, ready to go.
My name is Marilyn Evans, and I am the oldest around person of the Evans Farms. Matriarch, I guess you'd call that, huh? We met in school, and we dated, and 2 years later we were married in 1960. Then came children, Jane, Gino, and Todd. He was a different kind of person. He raced dirt track. He was a NASCAR state champion in 1969. He also did treasure diving. He did a lot of research on Spanish treasures, and he had a boat that they took to the Bahamas and worked several wrecks there. But then the farm was always come back to the farm to work, okay, to develop the fish and find some sales. We bought the first property in 1982, And of course, it was all, the woods and stuff. And so we had to build the roads and then build where we're going to put the ponds and the fields. When we started off with just having hybrid striped bass and also the tilapia, he wanted a species that would give us an added product, and that's why we went into the sturgeon. So really, all the plans that he put into action was his original plans, and the kids and I are just trying to follow through with what he started.
All fish have eggs, right? And why is sturgeon caviar? It actually became a law that only sturgeons can be sold, their eggs can be sold for caviar way back in the early 1900s.
Tell Lauren we're ready for her.
Sturgeon eggs have always been held to a high standard because they were the food of the kings and etc. because of their large eggs. Once folks figured out how to brine them, to store them and keep them, they became a staple for many of those countries as food of the royalty, and even fishermen's families. That was an easy way to have protein.
Honestly, it's nerve-wracking because some of the first times that we were harvesting caviar, trying to make sure that we were doing everything properly, it's been us trying to refine those techniques to get it where we need to.
Most caviar in the U.S. is imported and can sit in tins for years before it makes it to the consumer. Imported caviar is also subject to different preservation methods. Here in the United States, since caviar is a ready-to-eat product, the Food and Drug Administration regulates it.
We know that we have a safe product, and it's an excellent tasting product. And I would just be careful if I went to buy my caviar, I would try to make sure that you bought caviar that came from the United States or it inspected by the United States FDA. It tastes like butter. It's amazing. My favorite dish is to take scrambled eggs and put caviar on top of the scrambled eggs, and I have eggs on eggs, but it adds a buttery, just a hint of salt, flavor to those eggs, and it's my favorite breakfast. And we'll either smoke the meat and make my mom's wonderful smoked fish dip, or we will sell it to a lot of the local markets here in our area.
Really just the strength of both of them is just amazing to me, to see that they can kind of continue my grandpa's legacy of trying to continue to farm raise sturgeon to produce caviar, but then also trying to stay with the local markets as well. And that's kind of why we got involved with selling tilapia and hybrid bass as well, to make sure that we can try and sustain some of our farm expenses while we wait for the sturgeon to develop before they can become profitable for us as well. Our farm is super unique because we have a mixture of species that kind of are rotated between ponds and tanks.
This hybrid system means that the baby striped bass and tilapia start their lives in the ponds, eating plankton. They're weaned onto fish feed, then transferred to the recirculating tanks after about 3 or 4 months.
Once they're in the tank, then we feed the fish. Each species has their own diet. It's made by a fish nutritionist, and it meets their needs so that they can grow. Tilapia, it takes us about 6 to 8 months to get a market-sized tilapia, and it takes us about 18 months to get a 2-pound hybrid striped bass. We're actually unique here at Evans Farms. We take our tank water and recycle it through our ponds, and we let Mother Nature clean up our water, and we polish it with sand filters. So the water all drains into a large reservoir, which is about 5 acres of water. We pick it up with sand filters to polish it, put it back into our fish growing tanks. And so we have a lot of natural processes happening with our water. Both fish are excellent eating once you start raising them in our very clean water and feeding them high quality diets. The meat is excellent quality, and that's why they go to the live markets.
Caviar is a treat, and I'm going to wait for that special occasion so I can sit down and really appreciate it. And since I've never handpicked my own fish for dinner, Jane sent us down to a longtime customer of the farm, Lamb's Garden in Orlando. Hey Gwen, how's it going?
Good, you?
Good. So I just left the Evans farm, and that's where you guys get your striped bass and tilapia, right?
Absolutely, yes. We've been doing it for a long, long time.
How many years do you think?
In 1994, we started going to Evans farm.
Wow, 1994. And so you have some fish in here from Evans Farm
Yes,
right now,
they're
right?
all from Evans Farm, striped bass and the tilapia, both of them.
Great. So I kind of want to try some striped bass.
No problem, I'll cook you one up.
Okay.
All right, let's do it.
Jane likes selling into the live market because she gets a better price for her fish. It's difficult to compete in the frozen market with the amount of tilapia coming in from outside of the country. And for Quan, he knows he's getting the freshest fish possible. Lamb's Garden has been serving Chinese food in the Orlando community since 1989. He made me a very simple yet delicious dish. After scaling the fish, he steamed it for a few minutes until it was cooked just right. There's not a lot that needs to be done to fish when it's this fresh. Wow. That looks beautiful, thank you.
Sure.
So ginger, scallions.
Ginger, scallions, cilantro, and soy sauce, and a little bit of vegetable oil. It's very healthy.
Perfect.
Okay.
Thanks so much.
All right, enjoy.
Will do. This fish tastes even better after having spent the last 2 days on the farm, seeing how it was grown and meeting the people that grew it. Fish farming is a hard industry, so it's pretty amazing to see a family be able to succeed for the past 30 years, with plans to be around for generations to come.
If you guys enjoyed Sarah Curry's film with Soraya Films, she's actually going to be here in person next month to showcase another film that she's created about shrimp. So definitely come back next month to see Sarah Curry in person. Our next presentation is recorded, but it's very good since we got to preview it before today. It's going to be given by Damian Clare, and he's from Atlantic Sapphire, which is a salmon farm located in South Florida. So he's going to give a presentation teaching us all about his salmon farm, and his presentation is called Atlantic Sapphire Blue House Salmon. Yes, these are busy.
So we're very happy to be able to get him last week to record for us.
Yes, that's correct. Yeah. So Jim said that that Damien is at a trade show that Joe is heading out to. So these industry people are very gracious to give some of their time to us today. So enjoy.
All right, hello everyone. My name is Damian Clare, and I'm the Chief Sales and Marketing Officer of Atlantic Sapphire. For those of us who don't know us, we have a wrasse salmon farm in South Florida. We're located in Homestead, about an hour south of Miami. First of all, I want to thank you guys for having us to tell you a little bit more about what we do, how we do it, the mission and vision behind the company, also why we pick South Florida, and a little bit about the product and how and where we sell it. So I'd like to start talking about the dual naming that you see on the screen here. And our company is called Atlantic Sapphire, which is probably the name everybody's familiar with. And that company started about almost 14 years ago in Denmark. Johan Andreasen, our founder, is a Norwegian net pen farmer. He was the first one to raise organic Atlantic salmon in the northern part of Norway. And after he sold his company, his vision was, how can we make salmon aquaculture even more sustainable, for one? And number two, how can we shorten the value chain and avoid flying fish across the globe and actually make salmon in the United States? So he actually found what is called RAS aquaculture, the recirculating aquaculture system, and found that that was the way to have a technology portable enough so that we don't need the cold water and protected fjords of Norway, but that would allow us to raise salmon right here in the United States. And so I joined Johan about 10 years ago, and we started selling the fish that we had in that initial farm in Denmark. And very interestingly, we used to call our salmon Atlantic Sapphire salmon. But people would ask us, what makes this Atlantic Sapphire salmon different? And I'm glad today I'm going to have 20 minutes to tell you what makes our technology, our farm, and our product different. But at the time, we had to find a 30-second elevator pitch to explain what made the product different. And so what made the product different is that we raise it in close containment with recirculating aquaculture systems. And our marketing team at the time came up with a very clever idea, which was, well, we raise the fish not in nets in the ocean, we raise it in a blue house, which is like a greenhouse for fish. And that worked. It was really great because consumers, chefs, buyers could picture immediately what a greenhouse is to raise greens, vegetables, fruit, and so on. It's a closed building. It's a place where you control the environment and so on. And so we started to talk about the blue house, and amazingly buyers would call us and say, can I get more of that blue house salmon? So what you can see on the screen is that Atlantic Sapphire is the large technology publicly traded company, but that's over the years, our consumer brand has switched, and we now have a consumer brand called Blue House Salmon. So diving a little bit into the details, we say we invented the Blue House. Well, we did invent the name Blue House. I think recirculating aquaculture system has been around for many, many years, probably 30 or even more if you ask some people. But what we did is we took the RAS concept, called it a Blue House, and started to use it to produce commercially Atlantic salmon. That had never been done, especially at the scale that we're doing it. And again, the beauty of having the Blue House is that as we don't need the fjords of Norway, we're able to locate our production right here in the US. And we're also able to produce salmon in a way that's not only better for the consumer, but we also believe better for the planet and the oceans. So, some people get mixed up. I think consumers don't really get even the difference between wild and farmed. And there is a lot of work on our side to really explain to people, well, what makes our fish even different? Because it's not wild salmon, but it's not conventionally farmed either, right? So raising the fish in a blue house, again, as a greenhouse for fish, is something new. And we've been doing a lot of work to differentiate our technology, our farm, and our product. I guess the question we get the most is, why did you pick South Florida to raise a cold water species? And, Johan started in 2012 or 13, I can't remember, to look for the perfect site to do what we do in the US. And when he started, he actually started in Maine. And the reason he started in Maine is because that made sense, right? Nobody would raise a cold water species in the Sunshine State, but Maine had the right conditions. And then he went up and down the eastern seaboard looking for the conditions we need. And those conditions we need three things, because salmon is anadromous. Salmon is born in the river, so we need fresh water for the hatcheries. But then salmon migrates to the ocean, and we do salt water growouts. And so we needed a source of fresh water that we could access, very small volumes. Only 5% of the water we consume for the hatcheries is fresh water, but you still need to have access to that fresh water. But then 95% of the water we use is salt water. And saline water, well, you could get it from the ocean, but there is limitations to this. And if you're in a place like Maine, for instance, potentially you would have salmon disease, right? And so what we found in South Florida is a layered aquifer structure with three main layers that starts at the top, as you can see on the graph on the right side, with the Biscayne aquifer. The Biscayne aquifer is a freshwater aquifer that's used for drinking water and irrigation. And although we don't only use about 5% freshwater, we need to have access to this aquifer for our hatcheries. But what's more important is that if you go down about 1,000 feet underground, you have a confining zone of clays and silts where the water cannot pretty much percolate up or down between the two layers of aquifer. And under that, at about 1,000 feet underground, we have the Floridan aquifer, which is a saline aquifer. That saline aquifer is very interesting for many different reasons for us. Number one, it has a gradient, meaning that it starts at the top at about 2.5 ppt, so brackish water. And then as you dig down on the ground, it goes all the way to full saline seawater at 35 ppt. Number two is a very large aquifer that starts in the Carolinas and recharges automatically. So in our purpose, it's an unlimited source of saline water. Number three, pretty much no one else than us has a use for salt water, meaning that it's an unlimited source of water just for us, and where the permitting is fairly easy to get, especially at the bottom part where you have the 35 ppt salinity. And last but not least, that water recharges, and it also takes thousands of years to percolate under the Floridan Peninsula, meaning that this water doesn't have any contaminants. It doesn't have viruses, bacteria, sea lice, and it also is so ancient that it doesn't have modern man-made contaminants such as heavy metals, mercury, PCBs, dioxins, and microplastics. So we actually found a source of pure biosecure salt water that is unlimited and only for us. So when we talk about RAS, we do recirculate about 99% of the water, but the 1% of the water that we need to discharge still needs to be discharged sustainably. And that water can be loaded with things such as ammonia, such as phosphorus or nitrogen. And those components could potentially be natural fertilizer if we were to discharge them in a river, in a bay, in the ocean. What we found, and that's the last part of the aquifer that we found in South Florida, is that 3,000 feet on the ground, there is another zone that is called the Boulder Zone that the city of Miami uses to discharge treated wastewater. And the same way the water came into the Floridan aquifer over thousands of years, we're able to discharge the treated wastewater 3,000 feet on the ground in the Boulder Zone. And it's going to take hundreds or thousands of years to filter naturally until it goes back out as pure salt water in the middle of the Atlantic Ocean. So the geology is really the reason why we picked South Florida, because here we're not only able to do what we do, we're able to do it at scale, and we're able to scale to very large volumes of salmon production very sustainably. A little bit about, the advantages of what we do, and the beauty is that, there is some downside to net pen salmon farming, although us as a company are absolutely confident that net pen salmon farming is one, if not the most sustainable animal protein production method in the world. But we do think that on top of them being the most sustainable protein producers, we're actually able to fix some of the issues that they encounter with their methods. Things like having disease and parasites, sea lice is probably one of the biggest issues of the industry right now, and having to treat those disease and parasites with medicine, pesticides, and other kinds of treatments. So you imagine, as I said, that we don't have any of those viruses and disease in our intake water. We don't even vaccinate the fish in our farm. The untreated fish waste going into the ocean, of course, we're able to remove the waste from the water. All the contaminants that can come from the outside world that we don't have in our aquifers, again, things like microplastics, PCBs, dioxins, and metals. Escapes, those are things that unfortunately can happen when you're farming fish in the ocean. And, I like to make a joke about escapes because people ask us, well, potentially a salmon could escape from your facility. And I'd like to picture that to people, to show them a fish jumping out of a tank, going down the stairs, jumping themselves about 200 yards to a hot freshwater canal in the Everglades, evades the alligators, swim themselves to Flamingo Park in the Everglades, up the Gulf Stream all the way up to Maine. And if they did, they would deserve to reproduce. They would actually make the species better and more resilient. So jokes aside, escapes are impossible in our facility, which we think is a great thing. And then last but not least, the potential impact that you can have on wild salmon, and also how you can be impacted by predators besides sea lice and other parasites. Talking a little bit about the US market and why we picked this market. And you can see this is a little bit outdated, but basically what this graph shows is there is two regions in the world that do not produce salmon and need to import it via air freight. And I think that was really Johan's initial vision. Why do we need to fly fish? We don't fly beef, chicken, or pork. And so we need to use that amazing technology that is RAS to produce in market and remove the cost and the carbon footprint of putting fish on airplane. As you can see, Southeast Asia is also a region that's a potential to do what we do, but we picked North America for many different reasons. Number one, because of the ease of business, and number two, because the US is the largest and fastest growing market, of course. And so what we see is that, well, the growth of net pen farming is capped, so we need more salmon. We know that fish is raised in remote areas in the north of Europe, in Canada, in Scotland, Ireland, a little bit in Tasmania and in Chile. But what we find is the US is the largest and fastest market in the world, and also imports about 95% of the salmon that is consumed here. So it's also the largest commodity trade deficit that we have here in America. It's seafood. So what does doing what we do here in the US mean? Well, it means more job creation. It means really supporting what we call the US blue economy, and also a more resilient food system here in America. It means a better supply chain control and traceability. I mean, think that supermarkets pick up the fish farm gate at our farm. Very fresh fish going to market, and a lower carbon footprint by removing the air freight component. So here I put a little drawing and graph of what the typical conventional salmon value chain looks like. But if you were to take Chile, for instance, the fish starts in a land-based hatchery such as ours, then take a wellboat to a net pen, another wellboat to a processing plant in the south of Chile, a truck to Santiago Airport, then a flight to Miami Airport, and finally a truck to the end consumer. And here, again, it's Blue House, truck, and consumer. We deliver directly farm gates to the customers. And that has a lot of advantages. Of course, less risk of supply chain interruption. You guys see what happened during COVID, and we can fight this. The fact that we don't have the air freight component means that we're also able to remove the styrofoam, which is single-use plastic. We have extra shelf life, meaning less food waste and less shrink at the store. And our fish can reach supermarkets between 2 to 4 days versus 7 to 9 days. So we get that extra freshness as well for the consumers. A little bit about the farm. That's a very simplified graph of what is a 9-acre building under one roof, right? It's almost 400,000 square feet under one roof. And what we have is the freshwater systems on the left, where we import salmon eggs from Norway and Iceland. We recirculate the water between the aquifer layers. We bring feed from our feed partners trading in Canada, and they're looking into building a feed plant on our side. And under one roof, we come out with fresh salmon fillets ready to ship or to further process for our customers. Again, so everything under one roof, literally from egg to ready-to-eat products. And an amazing control of everything that happens, at the farm, starting with fish welfare, biosecurity. We're able to give the fish the perfect conditions that they need to thrive. And this is, of course, done through an immense amount of technology. I mean, there is hundreds of thousands of sensors in that farm where we monitor dozens of parameters in real time. And you can imagine the amount of data that we have. And basically that helps us learn every day even more, what are the perfect conditions for the fish through the life cycle. A little bit about the sustainability part. We're doing a lot of work on that side, and removing the carbon footprint of air freight, or moving our energy consumption to more renewable sources, to injecting CO2 into the aquifer. Are a lot of the things that we've discussed already. The zero waste by having less shrinkage in the shelves, and also using all our byproduct for pet food, for instance. The fact that we don't use single-use plastic. But one that's very interesting, and that's always a conversation, is you can only be as sustainable as your feed is. And that's where one of the places where we're working a lot to be that net marine protein producer. And that's something that we've already achieved back at the end of 2023. We're still working to lower with targets to remove most, if not all, marine ingredients from the feed, but we're very happy that already through the use of algae oil, we're able to be a net marine protein producer, meaning we consume less fish than we produce fish. Then talking about the product itself, well, if we never vaccinate, we don't use antibiotics, And if we put algae oil that has amazingly high omega-3 content in the fish, we do all this for the good of the fish, but the beauty is that all those characteristics of the product translates into a healthier product for the consumers. We're very proud that our fish has extremely low levels of mercury. I mean, it's almost, I think the latest numbers that we've seen is 200 times less than the max value allowed by the FDA. So it's very, very low, very high level of omega-3s, and that's been recognized, by us getting the American Heart Association Heart Check certified. And so, yeah, to finish with the product itself, people love our fish. And again, because we don't have parasites, it doesn't need to be frozen for parasite destruction. So we have a fresh sushi grade, very safe fish. By the way, our processing plant in-house also has the highest levels of food safety. We're an SQF certified processing facility. Our fish is fresher and it's also mild and delicious, and we're doing really great with the consumers on that freshness and flavor profile. So I'll finish the presentation by saying that this is not only a PowerPoint, right? And we've been selling the fish. We've been on the shelves, for instance, of every single public supermarket here in Florida for the last 3 years. We're very proud that we've never missed an order with them, and we're growing. Our ramp up is happening as we speak, and we should hit the full steady state capacity between now and somewhere in the summer or into the second half of the year for a production of close to 10,000 tons of Atlantic salmon. So this is what I had for today. Thank you for listening.
All right, so that was very interesting. We did a Q&A session with Damien online that is also recorded, so we will play that later during our Q&A session. So if you have questions about salmon, hopefully we ask them for you. But our last presenter this morning is going to be Joe Cardenas. He is the founder and CEO of Aquaculture, and he is going to tell us all about his Pompano farm in Fort Pierce, Florida. So warm welcome for Joe, please.
We'll see if I need to be heard any louder. I will. After hearing all this morning, it was great. We're kind of a blend, if you say, or a mix of a lot of the discussions this morning. I'll tell you, the only difference being people find most interesting, and I'll get into what we raise and how we do it, but kind of more the backstory. I was in banking, a lucky 7 or 8 years ago, and completely different industry and so forth. And what kept coming back to me was, I had stopped learning in that field, and personally, I just felt that to be something if I had to face the next 20, 25 years, I wanted to keep growing and continue to find an industry that no matter what you do, there's always inspiration to improve and add efficiencies. And boy, I think I overdid it. I found one that was probably the hardest for all those reasons to get into. But I've been fortunate. The idea only started because I had a lot of family, friends, and others who believed in the project, and most thought I was nuts, but they trusted me enough. I wasn't going to move to the Bahamas with their money or go do something else. They said, okay, Joe, I really don't understand half of what you just said, but I believe you, and I believe that what you raise, and I've kind of heard of Pompano before, so let's see what happens, right? So to give you a little introduction, I'm going to play a video, maybe, if I could figure it out. That we're very lucky. You saw the video on Evans Farm. That was done by Sarah Curry and Soraya Films, and we were lucky that she came in, and mine's nowhere near. I got mine down to about a 2-minute version, so you won't see a whole film, but it really does inspire. It gives you a visual. No matter what I'll say up here the next 15 minutes, it's less educational than what you can actually see about what we do on our operation. So, yeah, give me 1 second. Let's see. Okay. The great Oz in the back.
When you look out and see an endless expanse of water, it's easy to assume there will always be fish in the ocean. 15 years ago, I worked on commercial fishing boats and heard stories of the boats being heavy with fish. I never witnessed that abundance when I was on the water. And since then, I've spent time learning about how seafood is caught and how it's grown. There are more people than ever wanting access to good seafood. And luckily, there are folks here in Florida working to make that happen. In addition to fishermen here, there are fish farmers who know that the fish don't sleep when they go home, who know that in order to succeed, they need resilience, innovation, and determination.
This type of aquaculture, recirculating aquaculture, whether it's pompano, whether it's salmon or whatever species, is new, right? And I think the phrase I like to use is persistence pays, right? It takes time, it takes money, and it takes a lot of patience.
The team has been working hard to raise these fish for the past 10 months to get them to the point where they're ready to be harvested. Every Monday morning, the team preps for harvest, and the amount that's harvested depends on the orders for the week. The crew nets the fish into an ice bath, and because pompano are warm water fish, the ice bath kills them quickly. They're then divided by size from around 1 pound to 1.25 pounds. Aquaco has been harvesting fish weekly in this facility for the past year. They have harvested and sold thousands of fish. It's the only land-based pompano farm in the country. The farm sells to wholesalers who distribute the fish to local markets and sometimes directly to restaurants. On average, seafood travels 5,000 miles to get to your plate. Today, we follow these fish to cotton capers, only 57 miles away. Here at Cotton Capers, Steve's crew fillets the fish before sending them out to a restaurant down the street. He also sells them whole in the retail side of the market. This fish could be on your dinner plate within days of harvest.
The increase in demand for good quality seafood every year seems to go up and up and up. The per capita consumption in Florida of seafood as a whole, both fresh and frozen, is far in excess of what it is in other parts of the country. When people come to Florida, they seek out seafood. They want to go to a restaurant, a seafood restaurant, or one restaurant that has seafood on the menu. As our population has grown, we don't have the resources of the wild fish to fill the demand. We must augment the supply of fresh fish with farm fish. There's no other way. The country or the world as a whole consume fish as they are today. We have the technology. We could easily outfish all of the oceans in the sea.
Versus wild fish, and he's been around for 30 years with an impeccable reputation, selling into Palm Beach and high-end restaurants in Lauderdale and all of South Florida, and it took me quite a few boxes to drop off and convince him to try and sample out in the market, and now he's probably our most consistent buyer every week. Let me back up just a second though and tell you kind of what we do and the purpose. You tell whether you're lucky or good or by accident, one of the things getting into this, I really had the urge to do I call it a non-common fish, right? We wanted to do something that was a little bit more on the spectrum of new to develop, but yet not very new. You know, as Paul mentioned in his talk, they've worked with pompano here probably 15, 20 years. People, I like to say with Florida pompano, have learned to rear them, but no one's really taken the commercial aspiration to raise it in wrasse and do it commercially. And so I had just enough faith that you could do it, but a whole bunch of ignorance to say, can it be done, and can you do it efficiently in a a building type setting, in a farm style setting? And so with that, went out, hired a great team of folks who knew a lot more than I did, and since have known. But we want to do a non-commodity type fish, and with that, there's pluses and minuses, right? The pluses are we're really not competing with anyone but a very small wild-caught population of Florida pompano. The cons are it's not as well known, right? I can't just take this up the eastern coast or over to California, Canada, and everywhere else, and everyone's heard of a pompano. Like in here, raise the hands. Who's had a pompano? All right, this is a biased crowd for the most part. We're in Fort Pierce. This is like the commercial capital of Florida pompano. But I'm pretty sure if I go to Boston tonight and ask that question tomorrow, it certainly won't be as many. But with that, to me, comes opportunity. So our mission was to do a non popular fish such as pompano, and one that I grew up here. I was born and raised in West Palm and grew up fishing with my grandfather on the beach. And I said, I want to go have something that's not imported or not brought in from out of state. The other advantage of the pompano, it's a plate-sized fish. And one of the attitudes changing with consumers is people aren't afraid to have now a whole fish on their plate. It's been very popular in Europe and other countries for many decades, but for some reason we kind of like the fillet, right, and not staring back at us and how we prepare it. That's changing, right? A lot of restaurants and chefs prepare to have whole fish. It's the only way sometimes in Mediterranean, Caribbean, you name it. But we're getting more popular. And you think about it, how many fish, if you wanted to have a whole fish, you can have on your plate? I can't think of many. There's a yellowtail snapper. There's a pompano like we have, but there's very few. So we find this great niche. It's also a great sushi, sashimi fish, which not a lot of people have tried because it's so good cooked. People don't give a chance to eat it raw. But I tell you, try it one day. It's quite amazing. So why pompano? I kind of explained a little bit. How we raise it, you saw a little bit from the video, but I made a lot of mistakes early on. The first mistake was, let me try to figure out the unknowns, which was a lot of the boring things in the science. I say boring, it's not boring anymore, but it was all the data we had to get to say, how long does it take to grow a pompano? What temperature are they really, really ideal? What oxygen levels, water chemistry? And so figuring that out, we could buy a fingerling, right? There was a company here in Vero Beach that we were purchasing little 30-month-old fry, and we were doing what we needed to learn, which was the part on the growing out of the species. And that worked for about 6 months, close to a year. And we came to the realization, to be consistent, we need to do it ourselves. So we went in, we built a brood stock for pompano, went out and caught wild Fort Pierce pompano, put them in, built a beautiful hatchery, started to raise them from eggs. So we're vertically integrated now completely. And we're at the stage, you probably saw from the video, but we built it just big enough to learn commercial lessons, right? But we have 8 acres. We're only sitting on about 1.5 acres. And the video is about a year old, but we've really only been selling and raising pompano for about 3 years. Long enough to have learned our lessons, and confident enough to now grow this and scale it, knowing that we're no longer in that learning curve, right? You're never done learning, but at the end of the day, we're at that stage where we got to scale. So as I begin to say, family, friends, and others kind of put me into this industry and helped get Aquaculture started. And now we're kind of taking the next step. We're going to look to double and triple production here this year with a smaller expansion, not even the full expansion, and then keep taking steps to organically grow it that way as a business. So, yeah, challenges, where to start. I'm going to talk about some of those here. But, tipping on, a biased crowd here, but why pompano? I hit on a couple of those already. There really wasn't a lot of competition to get into. I'll tell you the boring piece that's not on here. I realized quickly how expensive it is to raise a fish in this manner. We get spoiled because of all the things that the prior speaker said in his video about are true, right? It's a better quality. It's more sustainable. But I'll be honest, it's more expensive, right, than going out and catching it. We raise it for 10 to 12 months from literally egg to harvest. And so you're using a lot of feed, a lot of electrical, a lot of labor. There's a lot that goes into it, right? So it is really hard to produce a fish that you're not making a margin on and stay in business, right? I'll just be plain. That was more my background. I said, hey, no matter how passionate I am, no matter how much I can call this a passion of life, it's got to be profitable, or else a lot of people would be out of a job, or a lot of people won't find this to be of interest out past, curiosity or academia or so forth. We have to make it work, and we have to make it financially viable. So pompano, I'll keep it down in here. I have different buyers at different prices. Let's just call it an average of about $7.25, $7.50 a pound from a wholesale standpoint, right? So that's pretty good. You talk about salmon around $5.50, redfish is in the $4 handle, sometimes below, sometimes a little bit higher. We get a pretty good premium for a fish that grows relatively quickly. That 10, 11 months is pretty fast. So the economics become more and more viable, right? Two, it's just a good tasting fish, but which certainly helps. Limited supply. I talked to a lot of people who catch commercial pompano. I had to hire some of them to go get our brood stock originally, but they know it's a very seasonal fish. It's here and gone. And my biggest overcoming objection with buyers was, yeah, I buy it when it's in season, but it's always like a Friday night special at a good restaurant, right? Or Saturday night special. We're here now. We harvest every week, and we've done it now for 3 years. So people know they can get pompano year-round on the menu. And it's taken about that long to convince most of them to put pompano on the menu right next to what they get normally, the shrimp, the shellfish, the salmon, a snapper, a grouper. So growing, it's ironic. Most of our buyers are Orlando, Atlanta. Not as much stays in South Florida as a homer I'd like it to, but buyer wins. So we distribute now quite easily. We harvest on a Monday, we box it, it comes and gets picked up by their trucks, and it's, as you saw in the video, and it's out the door. I mentioned a little bit on the video why Fort Pierce was a really good area. Again, I was a homer. I looked at a lot of sites when it came to, our last stop where we live in Stewart now in Palm City, but we were in Jupiter at the time, and I really didn't want to go that far from home. The kids were in school, and the wife said commute or divorced, and commute was a lot cheaper at the time to do. So I started to look, right? And I came up and I met Paul here at Harbor Branch even before we even thought about a site or what we were going to do, because I read a lot of white papers and work that he had done and other folks here at Harbor Branch. But started to talk to St. Lucie County, and they made aquaculture a pillar of a business of the industry here to grow. So everything was full and center to find a great site. So that's where we were. We're right down the road, literally 1 mile. We do private tours. It's no cost. You just got to schedule it with me, and I'm happy to show folks around. It's really interesting. It's a small team. We have 5 people, so it's not a big, huge operation, but I always like to show people what we do, because it kind of still changes one mind at a time about what it looks like to raise farm fish. So anybody if you want to get my information, you're more than welcome. We do some informal things. We do classrooms. We do a lot of school tours in the summer. We do a lot of outreach in terms of just helping schools set up their systems and so forth, and growing in those areas. So these were the major, I would say, obstacles, but things we really had to get underhand in order to make what you saw and how we raise a fish work, right? And these are the honest answers that I found very hard to get, other than learning them ourselves and being quick studies. But reducing energy, right? What we do on land has a lot of benefits, right? But the counter of having a big cage in the ocean or a pond, sitting on lots of land is, we're constantly moving water. There's a lot of pumping. There's a lot of UVs. There's a lot of behind the scenes that says we need to reduce our energy efficiency, or else really what are we doing in the sustainable, sense? So we've done that. We've reduced power 40%. Looking at adding solar, which ironically Florida doesn't make very easy or cheap, but that's something we can do with a lot of rooftop space as well. Labor, technology, that's a tough balance in our field. Paul mentioned some of it with sensoring and monitoring, helping mitigate risk. I'm halfway in the middle. After operating 3 or 4 years, I could see where there's some things I still want hands touching. I still want human involvement. I still want that art of looking at raising a livestock, right, versus a computer or sensor. And there's other things that I hate to say it, my team's not here. I think automation would do better. Feeding, right? I think everyone, it's like human characteristic. No one in here probably washes their car the same. I can't get anyone in my team to feed a tank of fish the same. And it sounds so silly, and you can tell it's one of my pet peeves, but there is an art to feeding a tank of fish. And so they have automated feeders. It's been around a while. I pushed off of it for a long time, but let's just say I'm getting eager to probably do it soon. Caustic dosing for pH control, that's just another hidden expense a lot of farms look at in terms of what they spend. And these aren't caustics in terms of chemicals, but it's ways to kind of increase your pH, and it becomes very expensive for farms to run. Oxygen use. We have a huge 12,000-gallon liquid oxygen tower. And we're in Florida, and although there's a lot of cheap oxygen thanks to hospitals and other things and development, it's still not cheap, right? So I'm always looking at these ways to how do we improve efficiency without having to rely on all these outside vendors. I mentioned this already. This is kind of the dry stage of it, but this is the process. The advantages and limitations of RAS are that, again, vertically integrated, right? So we have our brood stock where they spend, and we get the eggs. We spawn every month. So every 30 days, it's like manufacturing, right? Every 30 days, we're going in, getting eggs, and creating a batch from that lasts us 30 days of harvesting. So at any given time, we have, even though it's only a 10 or 12-month-old fish, we have 8 different batches going on at the farm, which is very fast, and you got to move things, and it's very organized. A lot of sleepless nights creating software and Excel sheets to kind of help manage it, but it does move quickly. They're only in our hatchery for 2 months. We get them out from egg and hatching to about a 3-month fish in about 60 days. They're in our nursery and another component for about 3 or 4 months. Then they go in our grow out, which is the longest part of their journey, which is after about 150 grams or so, they go into where we harvest. And by the way, we've slowly got the market. Everyone wanted a 2-pound pompano because that's what they're used to eating in the wild. Well, for us to grow a 2-pound pompano in these tanks is very challenging. It's older, it's very expensive. So we've kind of shrunk that down to almost below a pound. And for those that fillet them or butterfly or present a whole pompano, it's a great fish. So people now kind of buy us, instead of pounds of pompano, they just buy units. So we had to kind of change our way we market and sell them. And again, we're wholesale, right? So instead of 500 pounds, we'll sell 500 fish, to that particular buyer or so forth a week. So it's kind of changed the game a little bit in that regard, is the size of harvest. So, vision and beyond, like I said, our main goal right now is we're growing. It's to get to about 90 to 100 tons. We're only doing about 30, 35 tons right now. That was our proven R&D, if you will, at a commercial scale. We'll be profitable at that 90, 100 tons, and actually a little bit more than what we are now, and pretty proud of it. We need to continue to grow, not just organically, but we've now had interest to sell our eggs and fingerlings inside and outside the country. So what we've developed is a really good model, and I say we because the team does most of the hard work. I get to pay the bills and kind of manage operations, but at the end of the day, it's a team that loves to be around the animals, loves to be around the fish, and I'm lucky to have them. So yeah, any other questions I'll probably get to answer during the Q&A because I'm probably missing the boat on quite a few, but again, please take me up on it if you're in the area or otherwise, or want to schedule a tour. I'm happy to share a little bit more about what we do. Yeah, so thank you.
Testing. Now it's working. Okay. So now we're going to move into our question and answer panel discussion. So if all of our presenters can please make their way up to the stage, I will be fielding questions for you guys. We are recording this for later use so that you guys can go back and watch this presentation or share it with your friends and family. And to make sure that the sound gets picked up on the recording, we have to use the microphone. So if anyone has a question, feel free to raise their hand. I'll come over to you. You can either ask your question in the microphone yourself, or if you're more comfortable with me relaying the question for you, I can also do that. Yes.
Where locally we can buy your fish instead of going down to Juneau's?
It's embarrassing, but Chuck's used to have it here in Hutchinson Island, and they're kind of more seasonal, so I gotta ask if it's there. The good and bad about it is we sell all wholesale and not direct to restaurants. It's really hard to tell where it goes. After that, it goes on a truck and 1,000 pounds to one buyer, and then where they sell to directly, they don't really tell me. Sometimes I find out. Family, friends, they said, "Oh, I had pompano," and that was in May, so I pretty much figured it wasn't wild. It's probably ours. So sorry not to be direct. I know again, Juneau's far. There's another restaurant I know in Tequesta, Hog Snappers, that serves it pretty regularly. But up here, it's challenging because, again, the direct method of selling just was very hard at our scale to go out and sell to restaurants and so forth. So we really have 3 buyers that come every week, and they're consistent and their checks clear. So I like them. Yeah. So, but by be quite fair, I've sold to public. Like, we're open. You know, we're licensed. We're able to sell direct to the public. If people wanted to do that and give me a call, I'll put my number maybe up at the end again. But we do that. It's just hard because we pre-plan, right? So someone has to tell me on a Friday they're coming Monday to get 10 pounds or, you know, whatever it is, right? So we do sell to public, and I have a couple restaurants that on time will come by and pick up directly. So long-winded answer to it's tough around here to find it. Yeah.
Okay. Next question. Yes, I'll come over to you. And I'll just mention that we are going to start with questions for these 3 presenters right now, and then we'll get back around to the salmon questions later. So,
this is for Joe. Do you notice in your pompano you get fin rot or fin erosion? When I worked in salmon aquaculture, because of the round bins and high volume, they would bump up against the sides, so one side would always have no fins, or the nose would get eroded just by running in. Have you seen that in your 3 years yet?
No, and to be fair, I think one of the reasons that helps that is we run pretty low densities compared to other species. You know, pompano is still a wild fish, right? What we have swimming in our tanks is the first coming from a wild offspring, right? There's 0 domestication. It'd be like going and get a wild buffalo and putting a pen and calling it domesticated. Well, good luck, you know, some days, right? But otherwise, it's a wild fish. And although they're naturally schooling, behaviorally, they can only take so much stress, right? So our density is about a third of what salmon run at, or tilapia, or other more domesticated fish. So that's half the battle. The other is good husbandry, tank design, you know, height, width, all that has a lot to do with it, keeping furniture out of the tanks in terms of, when I say furniture, pipes, you know, any fixtures they can run into. We also use, if you saw from that video, almost like a fence and liner style of tank. This is where my cheapness paid off. I got that idea from visiting tilapia farms in the middle of Florida. I'd say of all my cursing of them, the blessing is that they have a little give to them. You know, in pompano, if you ever see them eat, or you know, they'll swim right into the wall. So it's not like they're careful. But these tanks are almost flexible, so they're not like a concrete tank or you know, a hard fiberglass tank. They actually have a little give. So, but to answer your question, no, they school pretty well. You know, meaning they're constantly doing this, and they don't stop. I mean, their high metabolism is, when I buy my feed, I curse it, but it certainly helps them.
Yeah, hi. This is a question for, I guess, anyone on the panel. How does the weather and natural disasters and things like that play into, like, the fish pond?
So I'll go ahead and try to answer that. Joe can probably weigh in too, because he's weathered a couple of storms so far. But a lot of the answer to that comes in design, your initial design, and making sure you have redundant systems. Joe talked about his liquid oxygen. Liquid oxygen is a key factor in resilience. The other key factor is good generators. Joe has good generators. We have good generators on all of our experimental systems. Making sure you keep in mind where fuel is going to be available. Making sure you have enough fuel on hand to give you time to go find fuel when the time comes. All these things play into your resilience in dealing with storms. Good buildings. Joe's got a very good building. It's a clear span steel building, pretty well hurricane rated. Same. Our buildings here for our research systems are rated to Cat 4. Now, if we have a Cat 5, you know, then we're down at the church praying a little bit. But and I'm not on site for sure because we're in a flood zone. But you know, when it comes down to it, the redundant systems, automation that's taking care of things when you can't have your personnel on site and that sort of thing are the key characteristics that allow you to be resilient for that sort of thing. Ultimately, if you have the total failure of all of your backups or your backups, Your last backup is your liquid oxygen. Liquid oxygen, as long as that liquid oxygen tank is filled. So when a storm is coming, you make sure that you call your oxygen supplier and say, come and top my tank off. Because if you lose all electricity and your generators don't come on, at least you have oxygen going. And that'll keep the fish alive for many days. Because you're not feeding or anything, so they're not producing a lot of metabolites. So that gives you time. But nothing's perfect.
I'll add, predating even Paul's time here, we had a big hurricane in 1999. I think it was Floyd. And because we grow non-native species, you've got to take special precautions. And a bunch of the breeding, the ORA tropical group, moved their high-value brood stocks into a hurricane-proof bunker that has redundant power. We had a big white shrimp project that was going on, and they were literally weeks away from the completion of this project. And the best management practices for this non-native species is if you have to abandon ship, you have to pull the plug on these animals. You can't leave those animals because they can escape. And unlike a salmon here, those white shrimp can get out. Floyd was supposed to turn. All the models said it's going to turn, it's going to turn. It didn't turn, it didn't turn, it didn't turn. They finally had to basically nuke the animals, pour bleach into these systems. Tens of thousands of animals weeks away from being final harvest and measured animals they had to sacrifice because it's what the permits say you have to do. That's when the storm turned. And it didn't hit us. It gave us a glancing blow, but the next Monday, you never saw sadder aquaculture than shoveling out 10,000 pounds or 10,000 shrimp.
So just before I got here in 2006, but in 2004, Francis and Jean did hit us here, and that was most of our fish and that sort of thing did survive. Our buildings were substantially damaged. They did lose fish because a generator failed. So these things do happen. But the group that was here learned a lot. I got to learn from their experience because I didn't get here until 2006. And in 2006, we were still in the cleanup and rebuild phase. So I got here at the end of the rebuilding phase and redesign phase for the resilience. Megan Davis produced, and one of her graduate students produced a video that's available on resilient design for natural disasters. It was done on a project that was funded by Florida Department of Ag and Consumer Services. And I suppose you probably still get that from Florida Department of Ag and Consumer Services. Or we've probably got a copy laying around in a box somewhere, I'm sure, still, because they made a lot of them and distributed a lot of them. So if you contacted me through Laura and them, then and you wanted a copy of that video, if you still have a DVD player, of course. So.
Thank you for those answers. Jim did mention ORA, and we will be having a presentation given by them, not next month, but in May. So if you're interested in hearing about oceans, reefs, and aquariums and how they use aquaculture for the aquarium industry, we will hear about that.
A quick addition.
Oh, no?
No, they didn't miss much. Everything they just said is really in your pre-planning. Like we had power buried to our site, which was a upfront expense, but that doesn't mean you're not going to lose power. It just means it might come on faster. You don't have overheads. That's usually where the problems lie. Like that's when your frustrating time or the guys across your street have power and you don't because your line is last to get fixed. That's kind of the advantages to underground is that when they kind of get a leg going on in US 1, that means you're back up and running. So that helped. But honestly, one of my daily frustrations is aquaculture in buildings like this is like working on a battleship. You have warm, salt air in a metal building. It is an equation for disaster every day, right? So we're planning all the time for redundancies and risk mitigation. Cat 4 or 5, yeah, you're probably grabbing your ankles, so forth. But Cat 2 or 3 with a generator and that oxygen, yeah, the only benefit is things move by pretty quickly, right? And so I've shown I send my family way out of state and say I can only have 2 worries at once. So they get sent out of town, and I go watch the fish and man the fort, while we're there.
Thank you. Okay, I know we have a few questions in this area, so I'm going to start here, and then we'll hit yours next.
question is, what is the problem with solar in the state, the regulation? And I guess if I asked all of you, what's your biggest expense in this thing is besides labor, would seem to be energy. And
it's close. Yeah, feed at a certain scale, feed is definitely your top, expense, like 50%, call it, of your costs. But the problem with energy, or I should say, solar is trying to get it funded, either financing or loan programs or so forth. And I have not a huge facility at the moment. It was about $125,000 to have enough, the adequateness to. And by the way, it has a pretty good ROI. Meaning, if my electric bill averages probably $10,000 a month, right? So you think about it, that's not a crazy return on investment, to put in there. But as someone just starting a farm, you tell me to tell my board and my investors that's where we're going to put, $125,000. Like, well, let's make some money first, or let's put some to the side, or let's do it with cash flow. But more than that, we don't have great programs we're 24 hours, right? So solar can help us to a certain extent during normal operating hours, but our power's like this. FPUA loves me. I mean, I don't think it ever stops, right? Maybe an air conditioner in the office on during the day that gets shut off. But outside of that, we're steady. So at night, you need serious backup power, battery backup, if you're going to do all solar and go all in. And that's super expensive. And to be fair, these guys are probably smarter than I am. I don't know if the technology is 100% there, or at least at the cost that I could afford for battery. So right now, at that high cost, it's like a half help. I really want to pull away as much as I can.
I just recently toured the waste facilities, and they sell methane to the people at the juice people. Anyway, Tropicana. But they only sell about 40% of it. Now, they have this other portion of methane that's either trapped or they just get it out to find some other use for it. There must be some way to be able to either have generation facilities on site to make, because they generate this their own electricity at Tropicana. But getting it from one side of the town to the other.
I think that's the infrastructure part of it. Right?
Just for the recording sake, I just wanted to reiterate that the question was about using methane gas for energy at the farms.
So I wanted to mention that this is not a new idea in aquaculture.
No, I know it isn't.
In fact, it's used quite extensively up north. They do cogeneration. So there's in Wisconsin and whatnot, there were several farms that were doing tilapia. So salmon in South Florida doesn't seem right, and tilapia in northern Wisconsin doesn't seem right either, by the same token. But they had access to natural gas wells, and basically what they did is they set up cogeneration plants, and they used water-jacketed systems so that they were heating water to grow their tilapia, using electricity off the cogeneration to run their pumps, etc., for their RAS systems, and selling all the electricity to the utilities. So really, they were breaking even on their electricity and making their profit on the fish. Yeah. So that sort of system the technology is certainly there to do that sort of thing.
Yeah, I'll leave you one last thing. A big part of our energy is temperature control, right? Pompano love warm water, right? So I actually have to chill it down in the summer because they like it so hot that so do everything else that like a hot tub, right? That likes to swim in warm water, right? So we actually have to chill down a little bit, and in the winter we heat it a little bit. If you call it a perfect temperature, we try to keep around 28, 29 Celsius, which helped me, Paul. I've converted over now. It's Fahrenheit. I forget. Got that. Yeah.
We do Celsius.
Yeah. So that's pretty warm, but I found the first couple of years operating using a lot of energy to keep chillers on or to keep heaters and boilers on, and I got rid of it. And we just had to track growth to what sacrificing keeping a little bit colder temperatures would do, and so we reduced our energy about 30%, not heating and we're pretty lucky. This winter, although it was nice, it It wasn't really 30, 40-degree nights that get down cold. And our buildings are insulated. As long as we keep it relatively warm in the buildings, tanks stay relatively warm. So anyway, all going back to the energy, it's about third on our list. Feed, labor, energy is kind of the hierarchy of cost.
Hi, so Dr. Wills, in your presentation with the RAS, talking about how you basically follow all the trophic stages from the beginning of feeding the fish and going all the way down. You talked about filtering out the different nutrients and different sources there. How do you manage the phosphate and nitrates? Because I would assume there's still some in the system.
So you're talking about the integrated multi-trophic system.
Yep.
All right, so the phosphates phosphats aren't as a big deal as the nitrogen. All right, so I'm going to call it nitrogen as a whole. Nitrogen meaning the ammonia, nitrite, and nitrate. So plants like ammonia, they love ammonia, and they like nitrate. They don't really do much with nitrite, but the bacteria in the system will convert the nitrites that are there into nitrates, and then it's bioavailable for the plants. So the system is designed with the components where your fish are producing, your fish and shrimp are producing ammonia. That's being converted in the biofilter predominantly to nitrate, a little bit of residual ammonia, a little bit of residual nitrite, and then the pipes take that to the plants. Those plants being the seaweeds and being the sea vegetables. And now it's a balance of how much fish can you grow versus how much plants you have to grow. And it's about 6 to 10 times the surface area in plants that you have in surface area for the fish. So it's a weird way to think about it, because generally when we think about growing fish, we think about growing fish in a volumetric method. So we think of kilos per cubic meter and that sort of thing. But functionally from a floor space perspective, it's a surface area, the surface area of the round tank. So if you look at 6 to 10 times the surface area in growing plants, you have a lot more area in the sunlight growing the plants than you have in the building growing the fish. So the fish are, the plants, our surface area of our plants is producing, we have 6 tanks of seaweed producing 40
That's
kilos.
ulva, correct? Is that
Pardon
ulva?
Pardon me?
Are most of the tanks ulva, or?
It's mostly ulva right now, yeah, but we work with other seaweeds, and it translates fairly well to the other seaweeds we've worked with at a smaller scale. But you're looking at 40 kilos wet weight of ulva, which is sea lettuce. For those of, it's a common name that we use for it. 40 per tank for 6 tanks, so 40 times 6 is 240 kilos per week of algae production for 1 tank of fish that has about 750 fish in it.
So would that mean
about a pound and a half?
So would that mean that hopefully with that ratio that you've stripped it to that ideal almost zero?
So the nitrogen remains stable in the system with that ratio.
Okay.
Yeah. So if we didn't have that, we would see the nitrate level creeping up over time. But at that ratio, the nitrate stays pretty stable in that system, which means we're at the right ratio of plants. Now we do have other plants that we're growing at a smaller scale, experimental scale, the sea vegetables I talked about. But the main productivity in plants that are removing the nitrates is the ulva in the system. But that could be any species of seaweed. He's got a lot more experience with seaweed than I do, but it's you see that the productivity is driven by the amount of nitrogen and phosphorus, and primarily in these systems by the amount of nitrogen.
Okay, we're going to take one more question. I know that everyone has a lot of questions, but we're going to take one more, and then we're going to play the questions that we asked Damien and Claire, so that you guys can learn more about salmon. So I saw your hand up, so I'm going to.
Mine is very quick. I'm just curious, is it only seaweed you can grow, or is there ways to utilize the nitrogen for like lettuce or hydroponic vegetables.
The trick here with Paul's system is just that it is saltwater. And so you can't grow food crops, but there's been very clever ways around that. Growing the uva, growing the sea veggies, even nursery mangrove seedlings. So you certainly can do aquaponics. You just have to be smart about pairing halophytes, the salt tolerant plants. So you can't do human crops with, other than the sea veggies, you can't do human crops with the salt water.
No, but freshwater fish.
Yeah, freshwater, absolutely, tilapia and lettuce, and you can just grow the heck out of lettuce with tilapia poop.
Yeah, in most of the cases I've seen in the freshwater side, the fish are a byproduct. They're really not the cash cow, if you will, right? It's the veggies, and the fish are there to support the vegetables. Versus vice versa. In our case, we're looking for ways to support the fish. It's almost the reverse in freshwater.
And there's management issues as well. You can't harvest a whole crop of fish because you don't have the source of that poop. So you have to be creative with how you cycle the harvesting.
Okay. Well, I know that some of you other people had questions as well. So depending on the timeline of our presenters after the workshop is over, they might be able to stay and answer some more questions. But for now, let's give them a big round of applause, a big thank you for their presentations.
Thank you again for coming out today. We really appreciate it.
Yeah, thank you all so much. If you guys are interested in learning more about our aquaculture research that we do here at FAU Harbor Branch, or seeing a miniature IMTA, we have one up at the Ocean Discovery Visitor Center. It's going to be open until 4. We also have a tram tour that we're offering this afternoon and a boat tour. I believe both of them have space available on them. So if those are things that you're interested in doing and extending your time here with us today, please come find me after the workshop. I can help you with that. Let's see, anything else? Oh, please come and visit us for next month for session number 3. It's going to be all about shrimp, oysters, and clams. It's going to be really exciting. We're going to have some more really wonderful talks lined up. And to close us out, we're going to play the questions that we asked Damien Claire earlier this week. So enjoy.
Hey, this is Damien here from Atlantic Sapphire. So let me know if anybody has any questions.
Damien, I have a question. As of right now, you are unique, or nearly so, in terms of approaching your salmon culture, land-based Atlantic salmon. Is that going to be the case 10 years down the line, or is this the future of Atlantic salmon farming?
That's a good way. There is a few different ways to answer the question, but the first one, as I said during my presentation, we believe that net pen aquaculture is not only here to stay, it's a great way to produce protein. And when it comes to our production method, we like to be inclusive and not be one against the other. I think the world needs more sustainable proteins, and I think that the only downside to the traditional net pen aquaculture is they cannot grow any further. They don't have, one way to put it, there is no more space in the fjords, right? So what they can do is become more sustainable, doing some of the same work we're doing on feed and so on and so forth. But I believe that their growth, if it's not completely capped, is going to be very slow. We're seeing net pen production growth slowing down while the demand for healthy proteins is growing. So what we see is an opportunity to come and help fill the gap between a limited production growth and a ever increasing demand. And our technology is probably only one of the technologies that are going to come up going forward. If you're asking if we're going to be the only ones producing salmon on land, I'm pretty sure we're not. I know we have some good friends, for instance, our friends at Superior Fresh that are already doing it, and many other Sustainable Blue. And I'm sure that as we become more successful, it'll unlock possibilities for others to do, if not exactly the same thing, other flavors of what we currently do.
Okay, I have a couple questions. You mentioned that you don't vaccinate the fish, but do the fish get sick? And if they do get sick, how do you handle that?
That's a really good question. And the answer, there is no reason for the fish to get sick. in our facility. We have biosecure water, and if we do our job properly, they don't get sick. That's the beauty of the water infrastructure that we have together with biosecurity. So never treated our fish with any antibiotics, and I knock on wood because you never know what can happen. But the beauty of being in South Florida is where we are, there is no salmon disease. So again, you never know because things can come through the air and so on. But yeah, this is also one of the beauty and the advantages of being in a place that doesn't have a native population of salmon.
And then my second question, you kind of touched on this a little bit, but the feed is really important. And you said that the feed, you're working on making the feed as sustainable as you can, but it is non-GMO, hormone-free, antibiotic-free. Can you speak a little more on what the feed is and like where it comes from?
Yeah, so again, our feed producer Spreading is the one doing the homework. And I think that that homework is being done for ourselves, but also for the entire industry. You know, if you look at historically, the main ingredients in salmon feed were fish meal and fish oil. I mean, if you go back in the early days, they were literally throwing anchovies in the salmon cages, right? But the truth is, being more sustainable, meaning removing some of those marine ingredients. If we want to grow more salmon or fish in aquaculture, we cannot keep on using more of the marine resources. And, you know, to answer this is an ever-changing conversation. I think there is so much research happening. And again, we like to be at the forefront of this, and we like to be the ones pushing to test those new ingredients. I know we're already using, you know, besides still some fish meal and fish oil, and of course soy, which is part of the base of our diet, we were one of the first ones to include the algae oil, which we think is a fantastic ingredient. Algae oil has so many advantages, and it's not only getting the omega-3 while using less marine resources. Using the algae oil instead of other marine ingredients, you also get the source omega-3s without getting any of the bad stuff that comes from the food chain, which are, you know, the mercury, PCBs, dioxins, and stuff that comes from the ocean. And then I know, again, you know, this is a conversation you should have with the very large feed manufacturers that are spending, I know, tens, if not hundreds of millions of dollars on research on new ingredients and things that we're looking at, but they're especially looking at themselves, such as, you know, insect meal from black soldier fly larvae or single cell proteins, and so many other ingredients that are being researched right now, because I think the entire industry understands the need to find even more sustainable feed that don't rely on the ocean.
I had a follow-up on that feed question. It's a great conversation. The algae oil, I assume, is pretty expensive. Do you include algae oil throughout the lifespan of the animals, or do you just use it as a finishing diet?
It's not only a finishing diet, but I can't give you the exact answer on that one.
Okay.
Damien, thank you for such an amazing presentation. We talked last month at our first workshop a lot about how fish is important for our health, and how what fish are eating impacts the health to humans. And something that we did talk a lot about was omega-3s, DHAs, and EPAs, and how all of that comes from algae oil. So I was really excited to hear that that's what you use in your feed. I wanted to talk a little bit about the byproducts of your salmon after production. It's really amazing that you're able to go from egg to fillet in your facility. And I know that you mentioned that you use the byproducts for pet food. As a pet owner myself, who also love sustainable seafood, I'm always curious if the dog food that I'm buying that includes salmon is salmon that's also sustainable. And because dog food rules and practices are a lot different than what they are for human foods, it's really hard to figure that out. So are you able to share with us the brands that you share your byproducts with?
I can't do that, unfortunately. But I'll tell you that it's the best and largest ones here in North America, but no, I cannot talk about our contracts. But, you know, pet food is such a gigantic industry. And I think it goes a little bit, I'll talk about the human grade market, but if you think there is 2 cats per human in the US, so imagine the size of the pet food industry. And the truth is we only produce, or we are going to produce in our phase 1, 10,000 metric tons of salmon per year in a 600,000 metric ton market here in North America. So it's really a drop of water in the ocean. And you know, we work with big manufacturers that buy our fish directly or indirectly, but unfortunately, it's a very small part of what they do in such a huge industry. And you know, even if we did, we had that's a side joke for you guys, but we spoke in our marketing meetings to know if we wanted to do blue house salmon pet food, but definitely not a good idea as per our director of marketing to associate our brand with pets. But yet again, you'd be surprised how amazing the pet food industry is. They're very cautious on choosing raw material. It's a very advanced industry, and what it takes to make food almost the same grade as what you would do for humans, because ultimately pets, you know, need the same kind of food quality. So it's tremendous working relationship with extremely professional companies. So I'll leave it there.
Well, thank you for that. It makes me feel good, at least, that the salmon waste isn't going to waste.
That's right.
Do you guys have any other questions?
I'm good, and I thank you very much for joining us today.
Thank you, guys, and I'm sorry I can't be there in person. Unfortunately, time is limited, and I hope I can join you guys next time.
Understandable. Keep doing the good work. Thank you very much, Damien. Have a great weekend.
Thank you so much.
Masterson and Joe all helped put together a wonderful pompano exhibit up at the Ocean Discovery Visitor Center. It's brand new, so I forgot to mention it. But if you want to see some juvenile pompano, they're very beautiful and excited to be there. So thank you all.